This is a true crime discussion.
November 25th of 2020, correct? All right, so you have to say yes or no because she's recording.
Yes, sorry.
That's okay.
Hold on. Sorry.
This is a true crime discussions channel. We speculate. This is all just speculation. Because it's true crime, it's for mature audiences only. There will be no children allowed, no exceptions. Everything on this channel falls under fair use. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and share. It's free.
I swear I'm going to fix that thing to where it stops doing that. Do y'all see my background that Zaya Sandra made me? Isn't it beautiful? I apologize about that, but it's getting annoying at this point. I've got to figure out how to download that video to my phone and then upload it to my StreamYard so I don't have to play it off of YouTube. So again, I apologize. I wanted to say hey to you guys real quick. I saw Anders and Rubber Ramada and Abellis in the house and Eek and Jenny and I say Kara or Kara. Kara or Kara. You'll have to let me know how to say it, love. I saw that you became a member. Thank you for that. I saw that earlier when I was uploading these backgrounds. Hey, bad girl. Anders, I saw that you were going to get your next COVID shot. I hope that goes okay, love. There you are, new member. Thank you for that. That's super sweet, Kara. Kara or Kara. I really appreciate that. Thank you guys so much for being here. Jenny Jen, I don't know if I said your name. Hey, okay, Boomer. Thank you so much for being here. If I missed your name, let me know in the comment section so I can shout you out. I wanted to give you guys, before we start today, a very heavy trigger warning because I was watching this video last night. I'd actually already made the thumbnail for today, and I saw this video, and I almost, like, it was so horrible, I almost clicked off of it, like, twice. So I'm telling you, it's going to be real hard to hear. Like, I mean, it's hard for me to find a video that I can't even watch. Like, it was hard for me to get through it. So again, I mean, and I'm going to start it to begin with. It's going to be real bad. It's real bad, y'all. It's real bad. Okay. I can't stress that enough. But he brought up in this video an interesting question. And I wanted to know what you guys think about it. So this is going to be from the Shrouded Hand. Hopefully I won't get in trouble. Sometimes I get in trouble for playing other people's stuff, but it just means I can't monetize, which I don't really care about, to be honest.
November the 4th.
Let me get it. Let me get it big screen and I'll start it over and make it loud so you guys can hear it. So, I mean,
to be known as Jeannie Wiley and her mother walked
my
into the
computer's
social
acting.
services offices of Temple
My
City.
computer's having moments. There we go. Okay. So this is going to be the story of Jeannie Wilder. That is not her real name. Her real name has been changed. Okay. It is one of the worst abuse stories in history that I have ever heard. And this is the last time I'll say it. I'm giving you an extremely heavy trigger warning. Like I said, I watched some graphic things and I almost didn't make it through this video. But it was interesting to get through the end to find out some information and to learn about this case. Anarchy, thank you for being here. Anarchy says her name is Laura. Okay, they just called her Jeannie Wilder or Wiley. I keep saying Wilder, but here it says Jeannie Wiley. So I'm not sure. And again, I'm just telling you, it's horrible. Thank you for being here. If you would consider hit that thumbs up so we get out in the algorithm.
November the 4th, 1970. A girl who would later be known as Jeannie Wiley and her mother walked into the social services offices of Temple City, California. Immediately, one of the social workers noticed that something was wrong.
Again, this is from a creator by the name of Shrouded Hand. If you would please give them a like and subscribe. They put out videos about, like, you know, cases like this a lot. So if you like it over here, you would probably like their channel too. Sarah, yes, this is worse than Paradise Lost. in the relation of like Paradise Lost was more about police corruption, this is going to be about actual abuse. The parallels are not this. I mean, they're parallel to each other, I should say. The abuse is different, because Paradise Lost, with the West Memphis 3, that was police corruption, and basically a witch hunt. This is actual abuse. Yeah, I mean, oh yeah, let me get my banner going, but again, trigger warning.
Jeannie appeared to be a severely autistic girl of around 6 or 7 years old. She walked with an extremely odd gait. She drooled and spat constantly. She wore a diaper, and she seemed to be entirely incapable of making a sound. The only thing is, Jeannie wasn't 6. She was 13, and she wasn't autistic or deaf or disabled in any way. She was the victim of one of the worst abuse cases in human history.
Y'all, this video, it's like it starts off bad and it just gets worse, but then it gets better again. Kara says, these types of videos make me cry all the time, and I don't want to make you cry, love. To offset the sad tears, I watch videos like kids asking their step parents to adopt them, pet reunions, soldier reunions, and etc. So there's some ideas if this gets to be too much. If this gets to be too much, and I don't blame you if it does. I could barely watch all of it. Please click out, and then you can come back in a little bit, and we're going to be talking about the Chloe Drivers case.
Jeannie isn't this girl's real name. It's a pseudonym given to her by social workers in an attempt to keep her real identity out of the press. As we will learn, her alias is remarkably fitting. The idea of the genie confined to a magical lamp, bottled up for years on end, a symbol of confinement and isolation. Upon seeing Jeannie, she had a large black callus, a ring of worn flesh that extended across her buttocks and the back of her thighs. She was completely incontinent, and she seemed to shy away from any form of human contact or interaction.
This is going to be hard to watch, and keep in mind, this is after social services got her. Like, this is the videos of when she's starting to get better.
The reason for her terrible condition was unclear at first, but over time, police interviews with the mother would shed more light on the situation. Slowly, the true horror of what had been done to Jeannie was revealed. Now, to really understand what happened, we have to go back to before Jeannie was born. Jeannie's parents were Irene and Clark Wiley. Clark was an overprotective, jealous husband. He was frequently violent towards Irene if he thought that she stepped out of line. Since getting married, Irene had found her life becoming increasingly restrictive as Clark imposed more and more limitations on what she could do and where she could go.
Keep in mind, like a lot of people are going to say, well, why didn't she just leave? If you think about the time period, this was like the 50s, 60s. It wasn't that common that women left their husbands. And eventually she did. That's how Jeannie got help. But like I found myself saying, why didn't she just leave? And then I remembered the time period. Back then you were like shunned if you got divorces and things like that. Hey, Belinda. Thank you so much for being here. Belinda Busy Bee.
Clark didn't want any children, yet after 5 years of marriage, Irene fell pregnant. Late into her pregnancy, Clark beat her so badly that Irene was hospitalized. It was as she was lying in hospital and recovering from her injuries that she gave birth to a healthy baby girl. However, back at home.
Again, that trigger warning is about to get bad. There is a guy called Dustin Pointer who does red flag, green flag. He is funny. I've sent some of those videos to my husband. So there's another guy you guys can watch. Jenny and Basil are scared. Basil's actually laying on the bed behind me in the sunlight. But if he could understand, I'm sure he would be scared.
The arrival of a newborn child only heightened Clark's controlling nature. See, he had a thing about loud noises. The house was deliberately kept extremely quiet at all times. He and Irene conversed mostly in hushed tones. A radio was sometimes played, but it would always be kept at a very low volume. The screaming of this newborn baby would have enraged Clark. When she was just 2 months old, he placed the baby into the unheated garage for several days. Eventually, this child caught pneumonia and died. Irene.
He put the baby in the garage because it was crying and the baby caught pneumonia and died. Okay. And then you ask yourself, well, why didn't people step in at this point when they've got a dead child from pneumonia? Well, again, remember the time period. I mean, they just bring the baby to the hospital or whatever and say the baby had pneumonia. And the doctors wouldn't think anything of it. They would think that, the baby just got sick and they were bringing the baby in. Oh yeah, sometimes. Yeah, it's bad. So we'll continue.
Irene soon fell pregnant again, but this second child died soon after birth. This time it was because of a type of anemia called Rh disease. Irene's third child was a boy named John. John, it seems, had more luck, and he survived, or perhaps was allowed to live. However, by the age of 3, John Wiley wasn't potty trained, and he wasn't walking well, a sign of the neglect that he was experiencing at home. Clark's mother stepped in at this point, sensing that Clark and Irene were having trouble raising the boy. She took John Wiley into her home for several months in order to get his development back on track. Clark, it should be pointed out, was a complete mummy's boy. He was more devoted to his mother than his own wife. In return, Clark's mother absolutely doted on her son. She spent a lot of her time at the house, lavishing attention on Clark and his family, something that Irene found quite irritating. Clark's mother even financially supported the family during times when Clark was out of work.
So Abella's put out a good point. He was a boy. This boy was survived and was healthy, and Abella said he was a boy, that's why. Well, it's very possible when you take into consideration that this man was a mommy's boy and how they reference how much of a mommy's boy he was. So I think that is why this baby, he must have dealt with the baby crying more and all of that. So this baby did make it to the age of 3. And then the grandma stepped in, but I do feel like it has to do with the fact that this child was a boy and he himself is a mama's boy. In that time period, yep.
In April of 1957, Jeannie was born. It appears that the first few months of her life weren't too unusual, at least compared to what would happen to her next. She probably experienced a similar level of neglect to her brother, but it seems that in her first 20 months of life, she was generally doing okay. In December 1958, disaster struck. Clark's mother was hit by a drunk driver and killed. This seems to have been a trigger point for Clark Wiley, the beginning of his descent into madness. He was already a neglectful, controlling and violent man, but his mother's death sent him even deeper into the realms of paranoid psychopathy. Clark became convinced that he needed to protect his wife and children from the evils of the outside world, and he did this in the most extreme way possible. Clark's mother's bedroom, which he ordered to be left completely untouched, preserving it as a shrine to her memory. The other bedroom, Jeannie was kept in. Clark, Irene, and their son John confined themselves to the living room.
Okay, Robert, thank you for listening, love.
At night, John would sleep on a pallet on the living room floor, whilst Clark and Irene slept in armchairs. Often Clark would keep a revolver on his lap, ready for any intruders. Apparently, during these first few months at Clark's mother's house, Jeannie was sometimes allowed to play outside in the yard or placed in a playpen. Although, in Susan Curtis's book, Jeannie, a psycholinguistic study of a modern-day wild child, she says that Irene confessed that Jeannie, left in the playpen to play, would take it apart with her fingernails. One wonders how long Jeannie, a tiny toddler, must have been left in that playpen, how long she must have been neglected or forgotten to resort to this action.
So the mother saying she would put her in the playpen outside, and eventually over time, the baby started taking the playpen apart with her fingernails. Like, I asked the same question. How long was she left in that playpen to start taking it apart with her fingernails and actually be able to do it without somebody stepping in saying, no, don't do that. That's dangerous, you know?
Over the following weeks, Clark's paranoia intensified. Jeannie's time in the playpen was reduced. She was progressively confined to the small bedroom more and more, until eventually she was no longer allowed out of that room at all. A small chair and the potty chair. Clark had constructed a special harness that attached to the potty chair. During the day, Jeannie would be strapped naked into the chair. The strap was designed to stop her from moving her arms and legs too much. Apparently, this was to stop her from reaching into the potty and playing with her own feces. Her cot also was essentially a cage. It had a wire mesh over the sides and the top to keep her locked in there. It also had a sleeping bag that could be pulled so tightly closed that Jeannie's arms would be kept immobilized by her sides.
Y'all, he had a harness that he would strap her to this chair naked so she wouldn't, because she's in a room by herself and you're locking her in there all day and she uses the bathroom in the potty chair. And so she was messing in it. And so they made a strap and a harness where all she could do is sit on that potty chair all day naked. And then when they did put her in the bed, there was like chicken wire. Think about chicken wire over the sides and over the top of it to keep her in there. And then they set a sleeping bag that could be pulled so tight that her arms were kept at her side. Like that is insane.
If she was lucky, at night she would be placed into this cot, but more often than not, she would just be left sitting overnight in the potty chair. The walls of the room were bare, the curtains on the window were kept drawn, and the door was always closed.
Eek says it's like a sick experiment in solitary confinement from birth. They're going to actually talk about things like that in this video. That's the part I want to talk to you guys about after we learn everything that happened. What are your thoughts on it?
Irene was discouraged from interacting with her daughter. The only real human interaction that Jeannie got was when Clark beat her for making a noise. In fact, he kept a large stick in one corner of the room just for that purpose. If Jeannie got fed at all, it was done as quickly as possible to limit the amount of time spent with her. She was only ever fed slop, gruel, things like baby food or soggy cereal. The food would be spooned into her mouth as quickly as possible. If she choked or spat any of it out, it would be rubbed into her face as a punishment. And it was like this, starved and alone, tied to the potty chair.
Y'all, I'm telling you, I told you it gets bad. I told y'all I almost couldn't watch it. And I watch some graphic stuff sometimes. This is bad.
That Jeannie remained for days, months, years on end. Years spent staring at the same blank walls, conditioned to remain completely silent, the restraints slowly deforming her body. According to Curtis's book, there were other horrible abuses, the details of which haven't been made public. I can't even imagine what could be worse than what we already know. Think of how many things you experienced between the age of 2 and the age of 13. Jeannie spent that period of her life in total isolation and deprivation. During this time, Irene had gone almost completely blind. Even if she had wanted to help Jeannie, she was completely helpless. That is until October of 1970. At this point, Jeannie was 13 years old and still bound to the potty chair. Irene and Clark had a violent argument, and Irene threatened to walk out if he didn't let her call her own parents. An interesting insight into the kind of coercive control that Clark held over her. Clark eventually relented, and he allowed Irene to make the call to her parents.
So this tells us kind of like the situation in the household. And yeah, I'm with you on the why. This is horrible, horrendous torture. to put it lightly, actually. But she wouldn't leave, and I don't know, he ruled that house with an iron fist, and he said this is the way it's supposed to be, and she didn't leave, and she finally got up the courage and was like, if you don't let me call my parents, I'm going to leave, and she ends up leaving after this. But yeah, this is beyond understanding. It's going to take us to some questions that I want to ask you guys about considering this case.
Later that day, whilst Clark was out the house, Irene freed Jeannie from her restraints, and the two of them went to live with Irene's parents. 3 weeks later, Irene and Jeannie made that fateful trip.
All right, now it's not going to be talking about all the abuse anymore, so that was about the worst part of it.
Jeannie's condition when she first went into care was shocking to see. This comes from Susan Curtis's book once again. Jeannie was pitiful, hardly ever having worn clothing. She didn't react to temperature, heat, or cold. Never having eaten solid food, Jeannie didn't know how to chew and had a great difficulty in swallowing. Having been strapped down and left sitting on a potty chair, she could not stand erect, could not straighten her arms or legs.
I apologize. I thought it was over, but here's this part.
Could not run, hop, jump, or climb. In fact, she could only walk with difficulty, shuffling her feet, swaying from side to side. Hardly ever having seen more than a space of 10 feet in front of her, the distance from her potty chair to the door, she had become nearsighted exactly to that distance. Having been beaten for making a noise, she had learned to suppress almost all vocalization save a whimper. Suffering from malnutrition, she weighed only 59 pounds and stood only 54 inches tall. She was incontinent of feces and urine. Her hair was sparse and stringy. She salivated copiously, spitting onto anything at hand. Jeannie was unsocialized, primitive, hardly human. The way she walks is one of the most disturbing aspects for me of studying how the growing mind develops. This experiment shows that if you raise a kitten in a drum for 5 months where it can only see horizontal lines.
This is going to be a trigger warning too, because they're going to talk about experiments that people used to do in the past during this time period on other animals and things to try to figure things out. I don't think they were like physically hurt, but it is kind of sad.
Lines, then they lose the ability to perceive vertical lines. So when you let them out into the real world, they'll walk around bumping into chair legs and things. The Wire Mother experiment, which I've done a whole video on, it was designed to prove that contact comfort is more important than milk giving in the mother-child relationship. Inadvertently, it also showed what a devastating effect social isolation has on rhesus monkeys.
This is hard to watch. I almost cried watching this too.
The thing is, these experiments are always done on animals. To experiment on humans in this way would be unthinkable. And you can't really use an animal to study human language acquisition. There's a reason why Jeannie became known as the Forbidden Experiment. Her parents...
Now remember the time period. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that we had to see that, but you got to remember that this was the 50s, 60s, early 70s when they were doing things like that. So, you know.
Parents had done what scientists couldn't. As a result, psychologists, neurologists, and linguists were falling over themselves to get a chance to study her. I'm not going to go too much into this because there's way too many people involved, and I really just wanted to focus on Jeannie herself in this video. Russ Reimer's book, Jeannie, A Scientific Tragedy, is a good source for this period of her life if you wanted to learn more about what was going on with the researchers.
I'm not sure if they put her in foster home. I think they put her in foster homes to begin with, and then it's going to talk about some facilities. Yeah, no doubt, bad girl. Sarah says child development is a very delicate process. We basically do the most development from birth through puberty. From what I've learned in my psych classes, our experiences through childhood. And she's writing the other half of that. Yeah. the whole time when you're learning how to talk and you're developing, this child was strapped to a chair in a room by herself and only could see about 10 feet in front of her. The second part of that, from what I've learned in my psych classes, our experiences through childhood determines our mannerisms for the rest of our lives. Yep. We're going to see a case of it.
The reports that came out of those studies from the people who cared for Jeannie give a good indication of what her personality was like. When I arrived, she was having her breakfast. Although she sat at the table with 2 other children who were engaged in fairly typical childish conversation and play, there's all kinds of rules and structures that we don't even realize that we're using, but we just seem to know intuitively. For example, and this comes from Russ Reimer's book, the sentence, "I gave the book to John," can be reversed to say, "I gave John the book," and that still sounds okay. But the sentence, "I donated the book to John," feels a bit awkward if we change the words around in the same way. "I donated John the book" sounds weird. This is because gave is a word of Anglo-Saxon origin, whereas donated comes from Latin. For some reason, even though we've never really had these rules explained to us, we know that Anglo-Saxon verbs can be switched around in a way that Latinate verbs cannot. And that's...
Isn't that interesting? Like, I mean, the example he just gave, I gave John the book, or I gave the book to John, as opposed to I donated the book, or I donated the book to John, or I donated John the book. Like, we already know through our language that we use every day, and when we're speaking to children and they're learning how to talk, we already know that these things can be switched around and how they sound different and better. In the Anglo-Saxon root as opposed to the Latin root of the word I gave is Anglo-Saxon and donated would be Latin. Like, I found that extremely intriguing. And if you think about it, we do, because nobody would be like, I donated the book to John, or I donated John the book. You would say, I gave John the book. Like, everybody, everywhere, in, out just walking around at the grocery store. That's how we talk. And it's interesting to think about it that way. I don't know if I'm going too far with it. I just found that really interesting.
That's just one example of the myriad weird language rules that we instinctively know. It seems like it's only in childhood when our brains are malleable enough to take all these rules on board. According to the linguist Eric Lenneberg, natural acquisition of a first language occurs during a critical period that begins at the age of 2 and ends in puberty. Exactly. At the end of Russ Reimer's book, he relates a time when the psychologist Jay Shirley showed him a box full of photographs of Jeannie.
CJ said, I'm trying to think of the quote study they did on twins. That's horrific also. I haven't seen that one. I just saw this one last night as I was going to bed, and I almost stopped watching it, but I wanted to talk about it today because it brought up some questions that I wanted to talk to you guys about. Sarah says her mom was clearly emotionally delayed due to abuse. Yes, I agree.
The last 2 photographs were of someone else, or so I thought. A large, bumbling woman with a facial expression of cow-like incomprehension. In one picture, the woman sits in a car pretending to drive. Her eyes are half-masked, her front teeth protruding in a drawn grin. In the second, the woman is indoors. She is about to cut a birthday cake with white frosting. Her eyes focus poorly on the cake. Her dark hair has been hacked off raggedly at the top of her forehead, giving her the aspect of an asylum inmate. Shirley watched grimly as my recognition dawned. Her 27th birthday party, he said.
She was an asylum inmate. Those places back then were nothing more than asylums.
Was there, and then I saw her again when she was 29, and she still looked miserable. She looked to me like a chronically institutionalized person. It was heart-wrenching. Without looking away from my face,
her soul was sick. That's what I want to talk about. Her soul was sick. What do you guys think about that phrase? Her soul was sick. How does one become soul sick? And is that what you think this is? I apologize. So I don't know about that soul sickness thing. I understand that she had a lot going on, but she got better. Like I don't like the term soul sickness. Soul sickness to me would be somebody who does horrific things, like their soul, they're sick to the very being of their soul. And she was tormented to her soul. So would it be then a soul death? I don't know. What do you guys think about that? And let me know what your thoughts are.
Face, he pointed to the photograph of the woman in the car. This is soul sickness, he said. There's no medical explanation for her decline into what appears to be organic biological dementia.
Okay, so Eek said they also said she was hardly human. Bad Girl said it's when you give up on life. Thank you, Abellis. Eek said she was a shell. Sarah said her brain was damaged due to abuse and her spirit was broken. Yep. Jen asked, sick as in hurt or sick as in evil? That's my issue with it, like soul sickness. And how do we determine soul sick, like sick as in evil or sick as in hurt? Like, because she definitely wasn't sick as in evil. So then would we call it soul sickness? Because if I think of the word soul sickness, I'm thinking that, you know, your soul is sick, you're evil, your soul is, I don't know. But I mean, at the same time, it could mean to say your soul is damaged. Your soul is, I would think your soul is dead because you have no soul. They have tortured your soul away from you. You know what I mean? Abella said she was tortured. Her soul is fine. She did nothing wrong, right? I can agree with that. CJ said that's what brought me here, the title. I do believe in this case she was so sick. It was in every level of her being. Okay, I can see that. I can get that. Bad Girl says, I think the final rejection from her mother broke her spirit. Oh, man. Probably. You're probably exactly right. Her soul didn't grow. A seed that never hatches, says Eek. Right. Yep. Yeah. The CJ agrees with Bad Girl, the final straw. Right. Yep. Jenny says broken soul. Bad Girl says so sad. And then Eek says she had a soul 100%. It was 100% there. We watched her jump for joy. It was stunted. Yeah. And then Zio says it's also used as profound emotional or spiritual distress. Right.
The last report on Jeannie's condition comes from a Guardian article from 2011. It says that 4 decades later, she apparently remains in state care. It also says authorities rebuffed the Guardian's inquiries. If Jeannie is alive, information relating to her is confidential and it doesn't meet the criteria of information that is available through a PRA request. So I'll leave you with this drawing by Jeannie, drawn in 1977, 2 years after she had been sent back into care. The labels were written by another person, but they were dictated by Jeannie. I miss Mama. Mama's hand. Baby Jeannie. I'm not sure if this is a happy memory or a wish for a childhood that never was.
You remember what it was like when you lived at home?
Thank you very much to everybody who is kind enough to support my work. It really does help.
So I want to read a couple of your comments out loud before we exit out of this video. I wanted to tell you guys again, this is from The Shrouded Hand and it's titled The Worst Abuse in History, The Tragic Story of Jean Wiley. Please give them a like and subscribe. CJ said, I thought Corey said before that evil is no soul. I apologize. I just now saw that. That says evil is no soul. CJ said, I see how you thought that, but to me, I saw it as a broken person, not an evil one. Okay, yep. Zio says it's a metaphor. Eek agrees. Zio says she was never able to help herself from what I can see through this video so far. Yeah. CJ said they broke her down completely. I think it's a very striking metaphor for one treated horrifically by everyone. I can definitely see that. Yeah, I can understand that for sure. Abella said, I will bet that her brain was stunted. She couldn't grow more because of that. Nothing to do with her soul or spirit. She survived. She had strength. Oh, my comment section just jumped. Hold on. CJ said that gave me shivers. She needed and wanted her mother. She sure did. A mother, an actual mother. And then Zio says soul sickness refers to a person that is unable to help themselves through self-reflection or connection, and therapy doesn't always help. It's extremely sad. Okay. Yeah, I agree. Thank you guys for giving me your opinions on that. I really wanted to know like what you guys thought about it. And then CJ says it's just completely heartbreaking. Oh, thank you for watching it with me. I know it was hard to watch. I just wanted to know what y'all thought about it because I saw it last night. Like I said, I could barely get through it. I'm going to bring up Chloe Driver now. In case you don't remember, Chloe Driver is the one that's on trial now for unaliving her 13-month-old daughter. But back to Laura or Jean Wiley. That story was just hard, and I was like, I wonder if I'm taking the term soul sickness wrong, or if they think, like, if you guys could help me understand it better. So that's why I wanted us to talk about that today. And I appreciate those of you that were able to get through it with me, because it's a hard video to watch. Okay, so I wanted to start with the mother testifying. I think that might be who this is.
Hey, good morning. You raise your right hand. You solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in the proceedings now before the court to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
State your name, please, ma'am.
McClendon Garrett. That's
All right.
McClendon
All right. Thank you very much, ma'am. You can
Okay, that's a forensic psychologist. So I want to see the mother. I'm trying to find it. So it seems like this one might be the forensic psychologist all day. It was supposed to be the mother. Okay. Hold on just a minute. You're posting silly memes in the Discord to try to help offset that. Yeah, that's a heavy case. That's super hard. We could do a lot more research into that. It's hard. Like, I couldn't even hardly watch that. And that's just like everything in a nutshell. He stated in that video that there was even worse abuse that they didn't even talk about all the way. Because they just weren't going to put it out there. I don't know if I could handle any of that, knowing anything worse happened. See, I don't like this one because it doesn't tell me. Let me see what they're saying. Oh, it's muted now anyway.
Ms. Trethewey, you may call your next witness, please.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense will call Renee Driver to the stand.
Okay. So now we're getting into the mother. She's going to be up in a second. CJ says, this is the psychologist. Okay, thank you. All right, so we just saw her for a second. Maybe we'll get to see her. Maybe we'll just hear the audio. Let me fix the quality. It's going to go black and then it'll pick back up. Hopefully it'll go that high. Okay, let me see what you guys are all saying. Okay, Eek dropped the Discord. Zio says she's presumed to be living in an adult care facility in California in her mid 60s. So that's where she's at now, supposed to be living in an adult care facility in California. It's going to keep doing that. Let me fix this real quick while we wait for this to come up. It's going to have to stay here. Zaya says little is known about her current condition due to efforts to protect her privacy. CJ says there is loads more to look at. Even the one of Queenie the chimp makes me cry my eyes out every single time. I think I've heard the one of Queenie the chimp. Yeah. Thank you, Zaya, for the information on her now. Trying to skip it ahead a little bit. Maybe.
Based on teenagers who know better than their
Yes.
parents.
Yes.
Wasn't her out committing crimes or anything like
Oh,
that.
no,
It
no,
was-
no, no.
Definitely thought she was
Okay, so all they've talked about so far is that they had a falling out
all-knowing or anything like that.
when she was a teenager.
Were you aware when she was a child of whether or not she had attempted to commit suicide?
When she was a child?
Well, as a teenager.
No.
Okay. Did you subsequently learn about some behavioral issues related to that after this case started? With cutting or anything like that?
She was cutting her wrist, but I never knew it because she always wore those plastic bracelets and it covered it. And I never had any idea that she was going through that.
Okay. She never communicated any of that to you
Never.
at all? Okay.
I just dropped the StreamYard link if anybody wants to come up on panel and talk about this. So it sounds like some of this mental stuff goes way back to when she was a teenager.
When she ultimately left your house, that was when she was 17 years old?
Are the closing arguments going on right now? I'll check and see if they're going on. We'll talk about that.
I believe so.
Okay. And tell me what your thought process was about why you let her go.
Hey, Cozy.
Because I couldn't handle.
Hey, Cozy. Thank you so much for being here, love. It's nice to see you.
The way she was going about it. My middle and my younger siblings, I think, learned from their older one. My oldest son badgered me, and he would do it all day, every day until he got what he wanted. And my husband always worked out of state. I was Monday through Friday only parent, working and having 3 children. And when there was just
Okay.
a time where I gave into him. Well, then it started becoming a habit.
So it looks like a lot of you have seen this, and y'all are asking me about closing arguments. So we can go ahead and go to closing arguments. It is going on right now. I just found it. So we'll watch the closing arguments for this case because that's going to be a recap. Yeah, she's not on camera, so I figure we go ahead and listen to the closing arguments, and then we can do a verdict watch. And when they come back with a verdict, if I don't come live, I will post it. Speaking of, I need to show you guys a post. I'll show you guys the post after we watch this that I made.
May result.
Hold on a minute.
She committed the act and she had a knowledge that her death, that her cruel and excessive pain would likely result. That
Okay, I'm going to take it back so we can start at the closing arguments. So we don't miss it. And that way we'll be a little bit behind and I won't get in trouble for like stream sniping. So we'll start at the beginning of the closing arguments because they just started.
before you in opening statements that Hannah would get lost this week.
Oh, dang it.
That there would be a lot of shiny objects, there would be a lot of scandalous evidence, there would be a lot about.
Okay, now we're going to start at the beginning of closing arguments. Right, Cozy? I'm with you. I don't know what to think about this one either. And effing
The
Colt.
attorneys now have the opportunity to come to you with closing arguments. The state has the right to open and conclude.
I told you when I stood up before you in opening statements that Hannah would get lost this week.
Hannah kind of did get lost this week, in all fairness. This is from Court TV. It is live right now. It's titled Live Georgia versus Chloe Driver, Day 6. And the title states Colt Baby Murder Trial.
That there would be a lot of shiny objects, there would be a lot of scandalous evidence, there would be a lot about Chloe Driver, the cult they were in,
Me too,
and
Susan.
Yaman, his abusive, controlling practices. And all of a sudden, just like that, we forget why you were all here.
She does.
This is why. You will have an indictment, and the indictment is not about Chloe Driver being a victim. It is about Hannah being murdered by the one person she should have been able to count on to do anything to protect her. There were issues in this case that are relevant to her mental state, to her state of mind, but they are not the focus of this case. The focus of this case is your decision with regard to the counts of the indictment. And the counts in the indictment are malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, cruelty to children in the first degree. And what I want to do with you, I get to talk to you twice. I get to open and I get to conclude because the state has the burden of proof in this case. So what I would like to do is spend the first portion of me speaking to you about the law that governs your decision. And I stood before.
Bad Girl said, rest easy, Hannah, you deserved better. And I do, like I always do with every string, want to bring up the victims in this case and also the victim that we heard, her name is Laura, but Jeannie Wilder that we were talking about and her mother, to be fair. Always remember the victims in all of these cases that we talk about. And if you say a prayer or if you send good vibes or whatever it is that you do to portray good energy into the world, please do so for the victims.
Before you in opening statements, and I said, now's not the appropriate time for me to talk to you about the law, but that will come. And I have tried to give you glimpses throughout the course of this trial by asking the right questions for you to understand what issues you need to pay attention to as it relates to the law. And this is the part where hopefully it all comes together and we can talk about applying the law to the facts. So I'm going to spend my first portion with you just talking about the law. And then after the defense delivers their closing argument, then I will talk to you about how we apply the law to the facts in this case. The state has the burden of proving her guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And everybody has heard that term, but very few people really understand what it means. But what it is the doubt of a fair-minded, impartial juror honestly seeking the truth. And when the judge reads you the law, you're going to hear embedded in the law at multiple points is that word truth. And what you will see is that a jury trial and your role is about a pursuit of the truth. And the law gives you tools to find it. And what the law says about proof beyond a reasonable doubt is that that is based upon common sense and reason. You are allowed to bring your life experience and your common sense and your reason into that jury deliberation room with you to reach conclusions, to make deductions, to discard stuff that doesn't make sense to you. You are allowed to do that.
Eek said, I know she's guilty. She did it, but the situation sucks. She wanted to get out of her creepy relationship with a double unaliving. Yeah, I feel like she felt like there was no other way out. And that's what's really sad about this case.
And the law expressly tells you that you can.
Really?
What is evidence? The judge is going to talk to you about the different kinds of evidence. There's two kinds of evidence, and you don't really need to worry too much about the distinction between the two because the weight you give them could be the same. But direct evidence is something that somebody saw, like an eyewitness, something that
Did she really, Cozy?
points directly to a fact. We hear a lot about circumstantial evidence, and it gets kind of a bad rap because it seems like it's less valuable. But really what circumstantial evidence is a set of facts or things that prove something by inference. And I'll give you an example of some circumstantial evidence in this case that we saw. She had cash in her bag. She had a cell phone right there beside her. Those things.
Okay, CJ said the only thing that swayed me back quite a bit was those phone calls just before lunch today saying, quote, you have to act screwed up. And then she responded, I'm assuming it's her, I know. That's crazy. I didn't hear that. Wow.
Lead to the inference that she had other options. You can infer, if you wish to do so, that she could have just called 911, that she could have just called an Uber, that she could have just walked out and ran to the neighbor's house next door. You can look at all of the connected surrounding circumstances and you can reach conclusions and make deductions based upon that evidence. You determine the weight to give to the evidence, whether it is direct or circumstantial. That is solely your responsibility as jurors. Now, the judge is also going to tell you that your role is to assess the credibility of the witnesses. And you can consider a lot of things when you're determining the credibility of each witness. And this applies to the statements of the defendant as well, Chloe Driver. You can discard whatever it is you want about the statements she made to the experts, the statements she made in the hospital, and you can accept whatever it is you want. You and you alone are the determiners of the credibility of each statement in this case. And the law gives you tools to decide and assess things that you would normally do in your life just based upon common sense. You know, do these people have a reason to lie? Do they have a motive to lie? Do they have anything to gain from the outcome of this case? Things that you use in your everyday life to assess people's credibility, you can do in this case as well. And the judge is going to instruct you that this is the law, the nature of the facts about which they testify, their means and opportunity of knowing the facts about which they testify. And this is true for expert witnesses as well. And I think that that's an important distinction for you to understand, is that just because somebody comes in here and they're called an expert doesn't mean that you have to automatically accept their testimony or their statement or their conclusions. We saw this week that there were multiple experts and they had varying degrees of thoroughness with regard to what they chose to focus on, with regard to what they assigned weight and significance to. And you can accept or reject any testimony of any expert that came before you this week, just the same as you can with any other witness.
That's an interesting path to go down, that you can reject any, I mean, basically, like she's saying, you can reject anything that any of the witness, or yeah, she said witnesses and expert testimony people said. And I've never heard that before. That's interesting to take into consideration. How long do y'all think it will take them to come up with a verdict? And I'm hearing about some questionable phone calls where they're telling her to act screwed up. I mean, but I don't doubt at the time that she wasn't. And I heard that she's got like 600 phone calls to the guy that she was in the relationship with. Abusive relationships are hard. A lot of times you want to leave, but you're scared to, or you don't, or you really love them and all of the things. So it's hard.
The person in this case who has the most to gain is Chloe Driver. And that is clear. We heard evidence from the experts about sort of the cautionary tale that is using the DSM-5 in a forensic setting, because the people in a forensic setting necessarily are facing criminal charges and necessarily have reason to kind of exaggerate their symptoms, because there are defenses under the law that only apply to them if certain things exist. So that's something that you can evaluate in deciding how much credibility and weight to give to the statements that Chloe Driver made after she had the opportunity to consult with a lawyer and after she understood what her options were for a defense. And I'm going to go through some of her statements in my second closing that she made before she consulted with a lawyer, before she knew the law on insanity. The truest version of her statements about her motivations and why she did what she did was in that hospital when she was writing. It was closest in time to when she committed the act. What you're going to have to determine is what was her mental state at the time she committed the act. So those statements are valuable.
Right. And those statements that she made in the hospital are extremely valuable when we're taking into consideration her mental state at the time of the act. So then you have to ask, when she wrote the notes in the hospital, was she still delusional? That's going to be how you're going to answer this case.
Valuable both in they're the closest in time as you will ever see to her committing the act. And it was prior to her understanding what her options were to get out of the situation she put herself in. So I ask you to assess that in determining which of her versions of statements to assign the most credibility to. Venue.
I'm so sorry, Anders. I'm just learning how to work Discord myself. If you don't want to work it, you don't have to. You can email me, love, or you can keep trying to figure it out. I don't know. It took me a while to figure it out too. I'm sorry you're going through that, Anders, my dear. CJ said the phone calls weren't good. She came across very cold and calculated, right? Eek says she has no one else but him. Of course, she'll call him and he'll tell her what she wants to hear and manipulate the combo to make her look bad. It's very possible. CJ said, I expected something different, but I also keep in mind she's brainwashed, right? Cozy said, what really pisses me off is guilty people not getting on the stand. Yeah, they don't testify in their own defense.
The judge is going to tell you venue is a jurisdictional fact, and every crime has to be prosecuted in the county in which it occurred. And the reason I think this is important to talk to you about in this particular case is because the only crimes committed in Cherokee County were by Chloe Driver. And what I want you to know is that there has been a lot of collateral information put before you about what happened in Asheville, what happened in other places, people that Benjamin has abused elsewhere, crimes committed by third parties.
Good question.
The judge, nobody in this courtroom has any power or authority to do anything that happened outside of Cherokee County. And so I ask you to focus on what your role is as a juror in this case. And the only crime that happened in Cherokee County was the murder of Hannah Nicole Driver. And I ask you to focus because that is your role and your duty and the oath that you have taken to determine what the law and evidence is regarding the commission of that crime. Whether somebody else has committed other terrible crimes in another jurisdiction is not a question that you are going to be asked today. And it is not a question that you have taken an oath to resolve. So you have to focus your attention in on Hannah, the law as it relates to Hannah, and the evidence as it relates to Hannah. The charges in this indictment are laid out: malice murder, felony murder based on the underlying crime of aggravated assault.
Yeah, that Benjamin name is, something else.
Felony murder based upon the underlying crime of cruelty to children in the first degree. And then the offenses of aggravated assault and cruelty to children in the first degree. You'll have the indictment back with you, so you'll be able to look at the charging document, count 1, count 2, count 3, count 4, count 5. But I want to walk through a little bit about what the state has to prove to establish each of those crimes. The first is malice murder. In order to establish and prove malice murder, the state must show that she caused the death of another human being unlawfully and with malice aforethought. And obviously, I told you in the beginning, there's a lot of words in the English language that people know and use, and then the law assigns them maybe a different meaning. So, we say crazy, we say insane, we say mentally ill, and there are definitions to those things and what they mean under the law. There's also a definition about what malice means. So malice does not mean ill will or hatred. And I think that's important because the defense has spent the week talking about how Chloe loved her child. Nobody has to establish that she didn't love her child. The element of the criminal offense is what her intention was in committing the act. And the intention in committing the act of stabbing that child to death doesn't have to be based on ill will or hatred. It can just be the unlawful intent to kill another person without justification. And what
is justification in this crime? And what was her intent? Because while she might have been experiencing psychosis, what was her intent? Like, what did she think was going to happen when she did what she did to her baby? That's a good point.
can also be is when the circumstances show that the defendant did act with a deliberate intention to end someone's life. And we know she did. That she had malice and that she had every intention for Hannah to die. The next count in the indictment is felony murder. Felony murder is when a person causes the death of another by committing a felony. The distinction here is there doesn't have to be any intention to cause the death. There just has to be intention to commit the act. So if you intend to commit the act and it does cause the death, that is a felony murder as long as the underlying act is a felony. And so what we've charged in the indictment is there's one count of malice murder for maliciously and intentionally killing her. Then you have 2 counts of felony murder, and the felonies alleged in those 2 counts are aggravated assault and cruelty to children in the first degree. So if she commits a felony and that causes the death, that's felony murder. And I'll kind of walk you through the underlying felonies in this case as well. So one of the underlying felonies in the indictment that the felony murder count is predicated upon is cruelty to children in the first degree. Cruelty to children in the first degree is when an individual maliciously causes cruel and excessive physical or mental pain to a child under the age of 18 years.
I wanted to read this. My neighbor just brought me a box for all of my doTERRA oils, which was super sweet. Bad Girl says if she was told to act nuts, it's a wrap for her. And exactly. Cozy says, poor baby. Yeah, I know. The CJ says the prosecutions definitely ended with a bang with the talks of her mom and dad. I was even shocked. Wow. Eek, you're so funny. All right, we'll continue on.
So obviously in this case, we know Hannah suffered cruel and excessive pain. We know that. We saw it. We know she was under the age of 18. And we know that the act that she committed was stabbing her in the neck. So all of these elements have been met. With regard to malice used in this, the judge will define it for you, what it means to maliciously cause a child cruel and excessive mental or physical pain.
She's laying it out, though, you know, here's the law, here's what you need in order to convict somebody of having broken this law, and here's what you have. So the way she's laying it out, I mean, she's answering the questions for the jury already, so that's not looking good for the defense, in my opinion.
But again, it's not ill will or hatred. Malice just means an intent to cause the pain without justification or excuse. It means a willful doing of the act with a knowledge that the particular harm may result. She committed the act and she had a knowledge that her death, that her cruel and excessive pain would likely result. That is what the definition of malice is.
Abellis, I can try to do a video on Discord, but I've tried to watch them and I couldn't understand it myself. I'm still trying to figure out Discord. I watched videos and I still can't figure it out. CJ said the one thing that still keeps me slightly, quote, on her side is that she didn't do some sort of attention harm to herself. She really did harm herself to end it. And, you know, I was thinking the same thing, but she only did it to herself one time. I had talked about that on another day when we talked about this. She did it to the baby several times, but she did it one time in her neck and that was it. She dropped. She didn't continue on. And then I have to question, like, if you're really trying to end it and then you do it to yourself and you feel that pain, are you really, like, if you're in a state of delirium, you could continue on even throughout the pain and not feel it. But if you're trying to fake it, would it be a superficial wound? Like, would you actually go as far as she did? Would you stop when you felt the pain? Would you not stop when you felt the pain? So I don't know. I'm torn about that too.
In the context of cruelty to children in the first degree. Aggravated assault. In this case, it alleges that she committed the offense of aggravated assault with a knife. Aggravated assault is when an assault is committed against another person with an offensive weapon. The judge will tell you that an offensive weapon can be a number of things. In this case, obviously, we've alleged it's a knife, but it's any object that is likely to or does cause death or serious injury to another. And we saw the knife, we know that she used it, and we know that it did result in Hannah's death. legal elements of each of these offenses and the evidence that came before you is very, very clear. And I understand that the bulk of this case as it relates to the law that's going to get challenging for you guys is the defenses, the insanity defense, and some of the things that sort of pertain to that. So I want to talk about that. Under the law, Chloe Driver is presumed sane. Every person is presumed to be of sound mind and discretion. We start from the proposition that she is sane, that she is criminally responsible for her actions, and that she has to suffer the consequences of her crimes just as any other citizen.
Cozy said, I think in a delirious state you would continue hurting yourself, but I'm no expert. CJ, coming in with a correction, said that she did it to herself 4 to 5 times. I was not aware of that. I thought it was just the once. Thank you for letting me know that and for that correction. I do appreciate that. So she did do it to herself. CJ said 3 to 4 times in the neck and once in the chest. Okay. All right. So then, yeah, I would say that it's very possible that she legitimately was trying to end it then. See, that's changing my aspect on it now because I thought it was just once. Sarah says that she thought she actually punctured her lung, and CJ said she did also puncture her lung when she did it in her chest. Okay, so that does change my aspect on all of this, and thank you for letting me know that, CJ.
That is the position you start from. You may infer that the acts of a person of sound mind and discretion are the product of that person's own will. When the judge will give you this law, she will tell you a person of sound mind and discretion intends the natural and probable consequences of their acts. I will talk to you a little bit more about applying this law to what we know about Chloe Driver and her decisions and the actions that she committed, but it was very, very clear that she understood she was murdering Hannah. And she understood the permanency of that decision. She understood that she was taking away a life. And the thing about the law is the law recognizes the value of human life, even if Chloe Driver didn't. When we talk about the insanity defense, the state only has the burden of proving the things I just talked to you about. Proving the elements of murder, proving the elements of felony murder, proving the elements of cruelty to children in the first degree, aggravated assault. We have to prove those elements that are contained in the indictment.
Hey, Trixie, thank you so much for being here today. I hope that your trip out and about was good. And CJ, you don't have to ever be sorry. I appreciate it. When I'm wrong, I would rather be corrected than to be spewing some misinformation. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. And I'm glad that you got all the info on this case.
The defense has the burden of proving her criminal insanity to the extent that she is not criminally responsible. That is not our burden. So that is a difference in the law that is not typical, because usually the state has the burden of proving everything beyond a reasonable doubt. But in this case, because the law presumes she's sane, they have the burden of proving her insanity. You probably noticed in our presentation of evidence, in the state's case, we really just focused on the murder. And in the defense's case, they focused really on the insanity, because that is their burden to raise. It is our burden to focus on the counts and the charges in the indictment before you. You're going to have 4 options on your verdict form. And I think this is important for you to know. It's going to say guilty, not guilty by reason of insanity, or guilty but mentally ill. And I will talk to you a little bit more about what each of these mean as we kind of get into the weeds of it. But this one,
I'm glad that you found us, and I'm glad that CJ says, oh, I definitely have the info. This case gripped me, and I'm glad that you found us, love. Yeah, I've been trying to watch it, but I've been doing a lot of other things on the side as well, so I haven't been able to keep up with it like I wanted to. But I do like to watch it with you guys, so we can all talk about it together.
will not be as simple of a verdict form as guilty or not guilty. There are other options. But what I want you to understand is, once all this evidence comes before you and once I really explain to you what the law is, you will really be left with 2 options. Guilty or guilty but mentally ill. based upon the evidence that has come before you, you will not be able to find her not guilty of committing the act. She has admitted that she murdered Hannah. Not guilty is really not an option based upon her own admissions about the act. And I want to talk to you about the law of insanity and what they must prove and all the reasons why it cannot and has not been proven and will not, the evidence will not show that the law of insanity applies to her. And we'll talk about that more in my second close. But what I want you to understand is that you still are going to be making decisions. Even if you choose guilt, you will have to make decisions with regard to guilt or guilty but mentally ill. So when we talk about the insanity defense, I'm eager to get to my second close so we can talk about the evidence and apply this to the evidence, but bear with me here so I can just explain to you the law before we kind of do that equation and put it all together. There are two ways of proving insanity under Georgia law. The inability to distinguish between right from wrong and delusional compulsion. And I want to talk to you about each of those. The inability to distinguish between right and wrong. What the law says is the test is whether the insanity was such that it deprived the person of the mental capacity to distinguish between right and wrong in relation to the act. And the judge will tell you that the question that you have to ask with regard to did she have the capacity to distinguish between right and wrong is her mind so impaired that she is incapable of forming the intent to commit the act, or to understand that a certain consequence would likely result from the act. And when we really get
Okay, so that's a good question, and that's something that I want to know your thoughts on. Do you think that she was so mentally incapacitated at the time in her delirium and in her episode that she was having that she did not understand what was going to happen when she took that knife in there and did that to that baby? Because I think she absolutely knew what she was going to do and what the end result would be, but why did she think she needed to do that would be my question. And the reason she thought she needed to do that, is that a result of delirium or whatever episode she was having at the time?
really get into the weeds and we look at it, it is going to be very, very clear based on her statements to the doctors, her actions, her statements on scene, her statements to the detective, her statements to her mother and Benjamin right after she committed the act. She always knew the wrongfulness of the act. She always knew the consequence of the act. That was never lost on her. She never, ever demonstrated any inability to distinguish between right and wrong. She just chose the wrong. And she understood the result and the consequence of that decision. Delusional compulsion.
I agree with that statement. I think she absolutely knew what was going to happen, and she still chose to do it.
Is a little bit trickier, and so I want to walk you through it step by step. You have to have all of these things in order to be found not guilty by reason of insanity based on delusional compulsion. And you will see when I go through this, you'll start to kind of put the pieces together about why we questioned all the experts in the manner that we did. Why are they asking everybody if she was afraid of Hannah? Why are they asking everybody if she ever thought Hannah was a threat to them? Because
Cozy says, I think an insane person could think the person as a zombie, for example, but I think they still understand the harm they are causing. That's in reference to the Lori Vallows case. Okay, I got that. I could definitely agree. CJ says, no, I do not. But I think she wanted to unalive them both because the other women especially. Yeah, I agree with that too. Abella says, I think she knew. Okay.
Because that's the law. And I want to walk you through it piece by piece. In order to show that she is not guilty by reason of insanity based upon her suffering from a delusional compulsion, what they have to prove is that the defendant was actually laboring under a delusion at the time of the commission of the alleged act. That when she stabbed Hannah to death, she was actively laboring under the compulsion of a delusion. That the criminal act itself, her act of killing Hannah, was connected to that particular delusion. You saw me up here ask the expert, I said, tell me the particular delusion. Because what got lost is that we just talk about in her life, she's had delusions. That's not the question. And we tried very hard to sort of narrow the scope. I want to know when she was in that room, what she was suffering from. I want to know her state of mind at that time, because it is whether she was operating under the compulsion of a delusion at the moment she committed the act, at the time of the crime. There are tons of people in this world who have had delusions or are mentally ill and do not meet the legal definition of insanity. So we need to know, was she suffering from the compulsion of a delusion? What was that particular delusion, and was it connected with the act that she committed? And when we talk about that, it's like if she has a delusion about, there being 169,000 people in the world, what does it have to do with killing Hannah? Those two things are not connected. So there was a lot of religious stuff, a lot of paranoia, a lot of things about, my parents are being watched by the CIA or are the CIA. None of that has anything to do with her motivation and her act of killing Hannah. And that is why in the questioning of all of these experts, I focused very clearly on what were her delusions that related to Hannah.
CJ said the way that she glared at the first wife with the baby girl yesterday was unlike how she's looked at anyone in this case. That also made me think, talking about her doing it out of jealousy of the other wives, just to have her husband to herself. Jeannie says maybe she was spiraling, but decided to act on those emotions. So I think she did know. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. I agree with what all of you are saying. And Jason Spillers, yeah, I don't know about that guy. I did submit a request to try to get his jail phone calls because they're in North Carolina and I live in North Carolina, but I don't know that I'll be able to get them. Most of the time they want a crap load of money for jail calls that I don't have, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm trying to get his jail phone calls because that guy is something else, to say the least.
What were her delusions that related to why she killed this baby, that were connected to the victim and connected to the act? Every other delusion, ignore it.
Yeah,
it is meaningless under the law. The third prong that has to be present, and this is very important, the delusion has to be to a fact that, if true, would have justified the act committed by the accused. What does that mean? Justification under Georgia law is basically Georgia's self-defense laws. The delusion she was suffering under has to relate to the particular delusion, has to relate to the act she committed, and the delusion has to be as to a fact that if we assumed it was true, it would justify the act or permit her to act in self-defense. I'll give you an example of one that would. If she was in that room with Hannah and she believed that Hannah morphed into a demon right in front of her and was about to kill her, and she picked up the knife and stabbed Hannah in self-defense, that would be a delusion, if true, that would justify the act, because she would have believed she was in immediate danger of receiving death or serious bodily injury from that baby. And under the self-defense laws of the state of Georgia, if we assume that delusion was true, she would be justified in defending herself.
I get that correlation there. Like, that makes it understandable.
That was not the nature of her delusions. None of them. And we asked every single witness, did she ever say anything about being afraid of Hannah? Did she ever say anything about Hannah being a threat to her or anyone else? Did she ever say anything about needing to defend herself against Hannah? Because that third prong of delusional compulsion requires that if we assume the delusion is true, it has to legally justify her acts. She has to be acting in self-defense if we believe whatever is going on in her head. And no matter how crazy the things were that were going on in her head, not a single shred of evidence has come before you that she ever believed Hannah was a threat to her. And we know that regardless of whether she was having delusions in that room or not, she was not acting in defense of herself or others and was not protecting herself or others from that baby.
Okay, Kara says, I stepped away from my desk. Are they really pulling the Letitia Stout cord? She turned into a demon. No, she was using that in reference, like, okay, it could be self-defense if the mother was having a delusion and thought that the baby was a demon, and she's like, oh my God, this demon's going to kill me. I've got to kill this demon before it kills me. Oh my God, I'm about to die. And she really legitimately thought that the baby was a demon, and then she did this act that would justify a self-defense clause if you believe that in that moment she was having that delusion. And then what she's saying is, but that's not the case here. That it wasn't a case, that's not what happened here. She's telling us basically what happened and how it's not a case like that. Hey, Reese, thank you for being here.
What we know is that what she has told everybody is that she was more motivated by wanting out of the situation or wanting to save Hannah. That is the opposite of justification and self-defense. She didn't view Hannah as a threat at all. And the defense pointed out in this case, well, isn't it true that she was holding the baby's hand in the body cam footage? That's a fact that is helpful to the state because it clearly demonstrates she's not threatened by this baby. She's not afraid of Hannah. Whatever is going on in her mind, she doesn't feel like she has to defend herself against Hannah. Maybe she saw this as a mercy killing. Maybe she was just desperate. But there is absolutely no evidence that this was an act of justification, self-defense based on what delusion was in her mind. Justification under the law is when she reasonably believed that she had to use that force in order to prevent serious bodily injury or death from Hannah. Or whether she believed that she had to prevent the commission of a forcible felony by this baby. There's no evidence of that. None. She does not meet the definition of criminal insanity based upon delusional compulsion. Because if she was suffering under delusions when she was in that room, the only delusions related to needing to save Hannah, not to Hannah being a threat that would justify her actions under the law. Delusional compulsion does not apply in this case. The judge is going to tell you that your verdict should be a true verdict. It's one more place in the law where the word true comes in. And a trial is about the pursuit of the truth. It is according to the laws and the evidence as you find it to be. But the judge is going to expressly tell you that you are not to show favor or sympathy to any party. The judge is going to expressly tell you you cannot base your verdict on sympathy. And I think it is important to highlight that you have to look at the facts and the evidence and the law objectively, because there are things about Ms. Driver that are pretty sympathetic. There are things about the situation that she got herself into that are kind of terrible. But the law does not allow you to make decisions about the outcome of this case because you feel sorry for anyone. The law does not allow you to base your verdict on sympathy.
She's not lying. And there are parts of this that, make me feel bad for her. But at the end of the day, there's a dead baby, you know?
So what I ask of you in that regard is when you go back to the jury room, think, do I feel sorry for her for any particular thing? Take your moment, feel sorry for her, and then set that aside. And instead,
I don't think postpartum depression would account for this because the baby was 13 months old, but I could be wrong.
Base your decisions on the objective facts and the law because you've taken an oath and you have a duty to follow the law, and the law expressly tells you you cannot make your decision based on that. Because every victim of crime deserves that treatment. Hannah deserves that. She deserves the objective and fair application of the law and the objective and fair assessment of the facts. That is the law that governs your decision. Obviously, there's going to be a lot more law, but I tried to highlight the things that I think point most directly to the issues before you. After the defense has their opportunity to close, I'm going to come back before you and I'm going to help you apply that law to the evidence that we heard in this case.
All right. Okay, she's coming right up, the defense. So we're going right into the defense now. Speaking about the postpartum depression avenue, CJ said, I was surprised they didn't go into that lane also. I guess they can't because she wasn't seeing medical professionals to judge that. That's a good point. I'm thinking that they didn't bring it up because at 13 months old, would you still be experiencing postpartum depression? Or would it just be normal depression or some kind of other medical diagnosis having to do with having a child now? That would be my question. She does a little bit, Reese. Defense, let's go. Sneaky snake. Snake. Zayu says about 5% of women reported persistently high levels of postpartum depression symptoms for 3 years after giving birth. Oh, wow. Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Zayu. Reese coming in said postpartum is 2 years. Okay. So thank you guys for that. I was wrong. I thought it would only be the first couple of months, maybe up to 8 or 9 months, but y'all are letting me know, so I appreciate that. I think she's trying to look disheveled.
As I told you in the beginning of this case would be difficult to listen to. We also told you from the beginning we had no dispute whatsoever about the facts as to what happened to Hannah Driver on December 8th.
There's a picture of him, so I guess that's her. That's not her. Is that her? And the baby and the dad? Like, this person in this picture looks scared, afraid, sad. Y'all will have to let me know. I know that's going to be him because he does look very Manson-esque. Yeah, and the baby is happy. Zayu says, sweet baby girl. She is very happy looking. The woman is not. She looks scared, afraid, nervous, in my opinion.
Of 2020.
That's her. Thank you, Cozy.
We all agree that the events that occurred that day are nothing short of a tragedy. Ms. Driver never denied that she didn't harm Hannah Nicole Driver on that day. There's also no dispute that she stabbed herself in the neck over 5 times and once in the chest to try to kill herself. We also told you from the beginning, we're not going to argue about anything related to the facts of this case. This case has always been about Hannah and Chloe's mental state at the time of the crime. That is it. It is clear from the evidence that has been submitted to you that both the state and the defense have shown very clearly Ms. Driver was suffering from severe mental illness at the time of the crime. She was suffering from delusions telling her that she needed to die. There's evidence that she had documented mental health history prior to being involved with Mr. Joyce. There's eyewitness testimony about her condition and the subsequent deterioration in the months leading up to this tragedy. There's evidence that she had been seeking help, communicating to those immediately around her that she was getting worse. And she could not resist those compulsions. She could not distinguish right from wrong. Now, I would agree with the state that they put up a lot of evidence in this case related to Hannah's death. The ER doctor, the medical examiner, crime lab, all of that. All things that we never once disputed.
Yeah, I don't think I'd be able to listen to all of that while they talk about everything that was done in graphic detail. That would be hard to listen to.
In fact, we spent, I think, 45 minutes one day about listening to the testimony about fingerprints on a knife. It didn't even have anything to do with this case. There were no fingerprints on the knife. We weren't even disputing the fingerprints or the knife. We've never disputed any of that. We've never disputed cause of death. We've never disputed how law enforcement initially responded to this, or any of the subsequent investigation that occurred in this case.
That is the one thing to remember. This could have been avoided, said Cozy, and it really could have. When I heard that in Asheville, she ran out into traffic trying to get away and then went right back with them. And I mean, again, she's calling him from jail, but still, I wish she had gotten the help she needed. I really do.
See, in most cases, there's a factual dispute between the state and the defense
Hey, good point,
as to the
Abella.
physical acts involved in a case and the mental intent. Never been an issue with this case.
Abella said if she didn't know right from wrong, why lock the bedroom door? That's a great point.
The only question has always been why. It has been about what led us to this deep, dark place. It has always been about Chloe Driver being a young, naive individual with a pre-existing mental health condition that had been previously undiagnosed, mostly based on her age. It has always been about the years of abuse, the coercive control, and living in this cult mentality that exacerbated these mental illnesses. All the experts agree. Ms. Driver was suffering from severe mental illnesses and delusions prior to, leading up to, and on December the 8th of 2020. You also heard from witnesses that described her and had observed that very same behavior well before that day and on that day as well. There's been evidence to show that she was in the throes of a severe mental health crisis during that 2-month period. There has been no evidence presented by anybody that this was an isolated snap or something that she is faking to achieve a particular result. 3 experts told you that. As I told you when I stood here before you in opening statements, I anticipated that they were going to present this case in a manner to draw at your raw initial emotions and hope that you would make those decisions based on those emotions. They presented this case in a manner in which they wanted you to ignore the evidence regarding her mental illness, her abuse, and all of the players involved in this case.
Bad girl, did they not have any doctors come up? Because that's going to be hard to prove her mental state if you have no doctors to testify to it. And then CJ said that she locked the door. Just to clear that up, because the last question we asked was why, if she was in the right mental state, why lock the door? CJ said she locked the door because she wasn't unalive to one of the psychologists, because she wasn't deceased. And hi, Maddie Lynn Marie. Thank you so much for being here. Maddie Lynn Marie said if that was her in the photo, she looked older. So I wonder if they're trying to make her look younger in court. That's a good question. I don't know. That's a great question to ask.
And the realities of what goes on in that cult. They tried to paint this picture that this was just a group of wacky individuals with weird religious beliefs, that they were a peaceful, loving, polygamous family with some wacky religious beliefs. Not the case at all. Jason Spillers gave you a peek into their belief system. After over a week's worth of evidence, it is clear that everyone in law enforcement, everyone, including law enforcement, the experts, medical staff, people who were around her, and even the strangers that encountered Ms. Driver during this time, there is overwhelming evidence that she was severely mentally ill. We have given you several examples of documented red flag events that occurred prior to that date that set the scene for what ultimately happened. Think about the incident involving Sandra Torres. Think about when Ben Yamin took Hannah from Chloe Thanksgiving Day of 2020. Watch that video she made when she had to go back to get her daughter. The evidence shows that her condition deteriorated. The delusions not only continued, but got worse collectively over time, all building up to that day. We know that her mental state was broken. She was seeing things, she was hearing things, and the delusions were telling her over and over again she needed to die. Over and over and over again. Think about the pictures I showed you in the beginning of this case. The ones of her at 16, the ones of her in the summer leading up to this event. Ultimately, right before the event, where you can see where she is at that particular point in time.
You sure could in that picture. And she did look older in that picture. It is definitely an interesting case as far as psychology goes. Going into the psychology of these cases, and a lot of cases, that's the part that I enjoy trying to understand and figure out the most, is why people do the things they do. So this is interesting to me. I appreciate y'all being here.
You can see the despair, you can see the stress, and you can see the mental illness in her eyes. See, there were signs that she was experiencing these delusions leading up to and on the day of the incident. There was discussions about death. She was seeing things associated with knives that she attributed special meaning to her because of that delusion. The 12 tribes, the dirty shirt, all of these delusions included the belief that she was sin. She was passing that sin on to her daughter. She needed to die, and Hannah was an extension of herself and her sin. She believed.
Okay, so now we're talking about the 12 tribes of Judah and how we're born into sin. I'll have to look into her actual story a little bit more, because unfortunately I haven't, and I should have. That's my fault. But that's interesting to hear that her delusion was directly correlated to the 12 tribes of Judah and born into sin.
That Hannah was so connected to her and part of her that when she breastfed, she was imprinting and downloading all of herself into Hannah. She was experiencing these delusions in her mind that made her believe over and over again that she needed to kill herself and die. Based on her delusion regarding Hannah, she was thinking if she left behind her child, it would be a continuation of her sin and her false belief in that delusion that she was responsible for everything bad in the world. She needed to commit suicide. The act of suicide is what was driven by these delusions. It was not because of jealousy or anything related to Benjamin ben Michael. Not at all. There's no evidence of that. The state told you in their opening that they were going to show that Miss Driver was not mentally ill. I think they said crazy in air quotes. That Miss Driver killed her daughter out of jealousy and some desire to be the only wife. She was not delusional. She just subscribed to some wacky religious conspiracy theories. And she was voluntarily part of this group and free to leave whenever she wanted to. There's been no evidence of that whatsoever. Let's talk about each one of these arguments and break them down. I'm not even going to address the assertion that they made in opening that she wasn't crazy. The evidence on its own speaks to that. There's no evidence that this event had anything to do with jealousy. There's no evidence that she killed her daughter because she wanted Benjamin to herself. The statements she made to law enforcement and hospital staff are not motives. She told Detective Cruz that she wanted a normal family. That's not an abnormal wish, but it's not a motive for murder. How does killing herself and Hannah achieve the result of having Mr. Ben Michael to herself? Or it's not logical. It doesn't make any sense, and it's not supported by the facts. She did not attempt to harm any of the other wives. She didn't attempt to harm Mr. Ben Michael. If she wanted to have him to herself, wouldn't she have gotten rid of the competition? If she was in her right mind, wouldn't she have taken steps to remove the others from the relationship? That seems to be a more logical response. Seems to me that she would have taken steps to stop those interfering with her wishes, not killed the child or herself. That argument defies logic. Jason also told us here there were no jealousy issues whatsoever within that group. never any issues with Chloe acting out towards other women in the group, or that she made any demands to have Mr. Van Michael to herself. Their own witness told you that. They were a happy family. They sat around talking about their feelings. They spent months trying to care for Chloe. There was no lack of attention. Killing Hannah and killing herself does not get Chloe attention. It does not get her alone with her husband.
They're dropping some of people's channels in our chat. Please make sure you sub up to our members' channels here. And if you have a channel, let us know and drop it into the chat box, and we'll have our people sign up to it if y'all don't mind. And thank you so much.
This was in no way a passive suicide attempt. If they had evidence to the contrary of how Jason portrayed their relationship in their life, state could have presented that to you. Ask yourselves why they did not. The state also argued that Chloe's free to leave at any time and not victim of domestic violence. And because she had access to money, she could come and go as she pleased, leave anytime. They argued she could leave him with her daughter at any time. That argument goes against every ounce of training everyone sitting at that table has ever gone about the domestic violence cycle. There is evidence that Chloe had visible hearing injuries on at least 2 different occasions. They know from their everyday practice that victims engage in contact with their abusers despite knowing that they shouldn't be. They know their victims continue to contact their abusers, even when court orders are in place telling them not to do it. They continue to contact their abusers despite knowing what those people are capable of and go back to them repeatedly. They know that victims, in their experience, take steps to plan an escape, but they don't always execute that plan. They are trying to ignore the facts that are supported by their evidence that Chloe Driver was a victim of domestic violence, and she was trying to leave and deal with that mental illness at the same time. They refuse to see her as a victim in this case because it just doesn't fit their narrative. I'm also just going to say this about domestic violence at the hands of Benjamin. Chloe was not his first, not his only, and certainly won't be his last victim. Gabriella told you how hard it was for her to break herself away from that relationship, both physically and emotionally.
Thank you guys for subbing up to the channels that were dropped. You guys are amazing. I love y'all. Y'all are awesome. I love our little speculation family over here. Y'all are amazing. Thank you.
She told you about how controlling he was, the physical abuse she endured, the threats he made to her about leaving and never seeing her child again. You got to hear about that experience directly. You got to hear about the abuse, the control, the emotional connection, her feelings of worthlessness, and the difficulty from separating from him with a child. You heard her tell you that despite being subjected to all of those things, she would leave and come back to her abuser. It fits within the cycle of violence. It fits what happened in this case as well. You heard her tell you that it finally took her getting the strength and confidence and belief in herself and having the assistance of her family members to leave for good. And she never looked back. And what may seem relatively straightforward to us is inexplainable about why you would go back. You heard Detective Cruz here on cross-examination tell us in further detail just how hard it is for those types of relationships, especially with a child, to get away from their abuser. She talked to us about how it's not uncommon for women to return to their abuser, remain in contact, or try to find ways to leave, but just don't have the strength to do that. Both Gabriella and Chloe experienced significant trauma bonds with Mr. Van Michael. They both kept going back to what they knew, what they could expect, instead of moving forward into the unknown. That doesn't even take into account the emotional connection or underlying mental illness. Now, the state's probably going to tell you that whatever happened to Gabriella just doesn't matter. It's not relevant to what happened with Chloe Driver or her mental state. It is 100% relevant because Gabriella endured the exact same treatment and she sat here and told you about it. It was exactly the same as that was described to evaluators, to law enforcement, all by Chloe Driver. These two individuals never talked about their own experiences with each other. Gabrielle told you that she had one contact with her where she tried to explain some of the things she endured and realized that she wasn't getting through to Chloe. Detective Cruz was the one that contacted Gabriella 6 days after this crime had occurred because she knew exactly what she was dealing with based on her experience and following the evidence of their investigation. The control, the power, and the degradation of two women by Benjamin. Thankfully, Gabriella was able to escape.
That's crazy that the officer contacted the ex-girlfriend, I'm assuming it was, in order to get her to talk to Chloe about what was going on because they knew that soon. Yeah, I was with my oldest daughter's father. I had known him from the age of 13 and we never got together till I was 18, but oh my God, it took me so long, like years, to leave him. And I would go stay with my mom and then I'd go back to him. I'd stay with my grandma and I'd go back to him. It was horrible. It was horrible. It actually caused my family to kind of disown me, even now. So it's very hard, but I now put the number for domestic violence in the description box below. I do want to tell you guys that it's not ever going to get better. Don't think it's going to get better because that's the biggest mistake you're going to make. It does not get better. Don't fall for the love bombing that they do after they abuse you and tell you how beautiful and sorry they are and all of that. Don't just leave. I promise you, you would be surprised how much better you could do on your own.
And did not have pre-existing mental health issues. Thank goodness she was able to protect her child. In the presentation of this case, the state has always minimized what has happened to Chloe leading up
I'm so sorry, Cozy, that happened to you as well.
to this. They didn't want to discuss her self-inflicted
TJ,
injuries.
I'm
They
sorry.
didn't put any pictures of that up in evidence. We did. They didn't want you to talk about any of that. They didn't want to discuss the controlling and abusive relationship. They want you to believe that none of it matters in the context of this case. They want you to ignore her cries for help, her behavior leading up to this, the reports about the things she was saying to these people, and her attempts to leave on November 25th and November 26th. Now keep in mind, this
I thought my mic was mute. I'm sorry that y'all are hearing me sniffling. I'm sick. It's some kind of congestion stuff that lasts for about a week. Hey, Ann Ruler, and thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. Ann Ruler says, yes, life will be so much better if you leave. And yes, it will be. Thank you for being here.
This case was investigated from the very beginning by Detective Cruz with regard to Miss Driver's mental state and from the perspective that Chloe was a victim.
Oh, no, Robert,
As Detective Cruz began this investigation, she immediately suspected there was a lot more to the story than she was getting from these cult members. Long before Chloe could even have an opportunity to think of a defense. She sat in that hospital. She hadn't talked to anybody. Detective Cruz had already interviewed everybody. And based on that, you heard Detective Cruz tell you she had contacted other people. She had sought those Asheville police departments. She knew what she was dealing with. You watched videos where Chloe told you that she had been hurt and where Chloe told Detective Cruz about her black eye.
Oh my God. Yeah, Chloe did talk about being hurt. Hey, Toxic Orchid, I hope you're doing all right today, love. Hey, Hello Kitty. Thank y'all for being here.
She told Detective Cruz about her paranoia, her state of mind, and you saw the videos of her saying she wanted to die with that baby. Based on that experience with law enforcement with DV victims, she continued to investigate that case. She found additional women, she found those police reports, and more evidence of what that world that Chloe was living in. Now, you also heard from Jason Spillers, and that was quite a treat. He was able to paint a picture of this group in two very different ways. First, he was able to tell you about how he knew Chloe, how he knew her to be a loving, caring mother who loved Hannah and did everything for her. He knew her before she decompensated and spent so much time with the group that he knew exactly who Chloe was and what she was like. He told you about the different times he saw her, the changes he noticed, and even talking to Benjamin about getting her treatment. He told you that the group spent the better part of the last 2 months leading up to December 8th of 2020 taking care of Chloe. He told us about her episodes and how she would have these episodes or go catatonic and have no idea what had just happened. That there were dramatic changes just in the time that he knew her, and it wasn't jealousy. it was mental illness. Secondly, I don't know if he intended to do this or not, he painted a very clear picture for you of what life was really like in this group. You could see how he idolized Benjamin. He endorsed all of his beliefs and the life that came with it. It was clear that he and Benjamin viewed women as property, as lesser individuals. He told us that the women are subservient and that they were not capable of having the same conversations as men. I think he used the words, they should be out frolicking and dancing with the babies. He told us that, yep, Benjamin set the standard.
He sure did. He said they should be out frolicking and dancing on the beach with the babies. Like, I was like, are you kidding me right now, sir? Do you realize what year it is? You're good, Sarah. Thank you so much for being here. Yeah, we are on closing arguments of the driver case. I am here and I'm listening. I'm trying to fix my thumbnail to state that we're talking about closing arguments instead of the mother's testimony. So I want to let y'all know that.
And that is what everybody had to live by. He tried to paint a picture of this wild alternative reality that no one was buying about polygamy. We know that he disputed that incident with Sandra Torres. Think about this.
Oh, Cozy, thank you so much for the super sticker. I really appreciate that. That's so sweet. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
If he punched a total stranger for attempting to help Chloe that day, can you imagine what these men do to these women behind closed doors? If Jason is that crazy, can you imagine how his leader is? Ask yourself why they did not let you hear from Benjamin. They didn't call him because they know exactly who he is. The facts of this case are undisputed, so let's get down to the experts. Now, we've all heard from 3 different experts in this case. They all agree she was severely mentally ill in the months leading up to the event. They all agree she was suffering from delusions at the time leading up to this. Dr. Garrett and Dr. Ballard both diagnosed her with schizoaffective bipolar disorder and borderline personality disorder. We heard this morning that Dr. Zom did not offer any individual diagnosis. That's just her approach to this. But she told you today that she didn't disagree with those. In fact, she agreed with them, maybe a slight variation. They all utilize the same resources and collateral information to conduct their evaluations. Both Dr. Garrett and Dr. Ballard told you that even outside of Chloe's self-report, the information provided among those sources of information was consistent and independently verified. Those doctors did not believe she was malingering or presenting in any way to achieve a certain result. The experts have told us that these delusions are defined as a fixed false belief that someone holds on to, even when the evidence shows that there's no way they can be real. They cannot be explained outside of mental illness. They are so unusual that they cannot be explained other than disordered thinking. That delusional compulsion that Ms. Gropper was talking about is defined as if that delusion had been real, it would have justified the conduct. Her delusions in this case were not religious in nature. She believed everyone was out to get her. She believed she had special powers. She believed she had magical thinking about things that she thought she did that impacted the world, that she was receiving specific messages directed at her. Those messages came both in auditory and visual hallucinations, but also those delusions of reference that were referenced by both of the doctors. Delusions are not things that are in line with a person's culture, and everybody knows them to be false. They are not extreme religious beliefs. A delusion that drove Ms. Driver to the point we're at today was the one that you heard from Dr. Garrett and Dr. Ballard and Dr. Zom, was that she needed to die. That is not part of any religious belief system. Those are not agreements for participation in any cult. All the experts.
Okay. Hello Kitty said I hit the like button on the way in. Thank you so much for that. If y'all don't mind, please hit the like button so we can get out into the algorithm. Yeah, it is mind-boggling how many weirdos are out there. Cozy says, imagine being groomed for years, drinking pee, no medical treatment, jealousy, weird beliefs all at once, right? It's more than I think anybody could ever even begin to try to comprehend. In my opinion. And y'all talking about sandwiches is making me hungry.
Experts agree on this. Now, I know you all sat here and paid attention to all of these experts, and I'm not going to go through everything that they have all talked about, But here's what I want to talk about with respect to each one of those. Dr. Garrett told us that the signs and the depth of her mental illness was ever present, that they existed before her relationship, and that she had been experiencing delusions since adolescence. That's important. That contradicts the state saying that she didn't experience delusions, that this is all made up. Dr. Garrett also told you that she was exhibiting those signs of those visual and auditory hallucinations even after being medicated for over a year and a half. When she met her, she was still exhibiting those signs of that delusional thinking. She was still having issues with suicidal ideation and thoughts that she needed to die. She told us it was clear she was experiencing emotional distress regarding the situation and confusion about the moral and ethical appropriateness of her delusions. She said, Ms. Driver said, I was at peace with how it was supposed to be. You heard that Dr. Garrett believed that she felt she needed to take her life because of her delusions, and everything in the world was telling her, in her mind, that's what she needed to do.
But I mean, again, the question becomes then, did she, because again, you're stating that she needs to take their life and she knows the end result is going to be taking their life. Like, it's not because of a delusion. I mean, see, that's what makes it so hard. It's not like the prosecution explained, like she thought the baby was a demon. So yeah, I got to kill the demon. I know that we're born in sin and we come from sin. So therefore I have to stop the sin and it ends with me. And it makes it hard to justify, is this a delusion or is this just a messed up belief that they had because of what they were being taught in this quote unquote cult? It is super hard, Cozy. It really is. It's really hard. This one is this is a very thought-provoking case as well.
Not just because of the delusions about sin, but because of all of those delusions of reference that she was seeing on a daily basis. That she was being told she needed to die. She would see a light bulb. She could see a knife. She could see all of these things that to you and I would mean nothing. But because of the disordered thinking and those delusions, it was feeding into her thought process and delusions. She told us that these delusions were above and beyond any religious teachings or anything that Mr. Ben Michael had ever told Chloe. Religious beliefs don't tell you you need to die. She also told you if you take someone who is vulnerable, who is already delusional, and bring them into this type of scenario and start teaching them crazy stuff, you are teaching them something that will only lead to an increase in their problems.
Abellis just gifted 5 memberships. Thank you so much for that, Abellis. You're so sweet. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I'm going to play our new members clip for y'all real quick. Thank you so much, Abellis. You're so sweet. Like, I really could never thank you enough for all that you do. And thank you again, Cozy. And I'm so glad. I mean, I can't express how glad it makes me to see y'all sub into these people's channels, to everybody's channels that have been dropped in the comment section. You guys are amazing. The Speculating family is just amazing. Thank you guys so much.
Dr. Garrett also told us that Chloe started out as a very vulnerable young lady who was already delusional to begin with, having these thoughts.
Thank you.
She also told us somebody that has a personality disorder, mood disorder, and substance abuse was her baseline. These things existed prior to her ever getting involved in this relationship. And that those circumstances only made this scenario worse. She also told us to think about this as not a particular moment in time. Ms. Gropper tried to ask her about the dirty shirt as a trigger. And Dr. Garrett quickly corrected her and said, no, you have to consider all of these signs. And she went through and she listed those signs. She told us that we have to look at this as a culmination of events, not something as a trigger.
I don't know what's going on. Like YouTube, it's not giving the memberships to people who are here, which is weird. It'll give it to people that like are subscribed but aren't even watching or whatever. So I don't know. I don't know if they're doing that to try to get more people to come and watch people's channels. It's weird though. I wish they had a way that you could like click on somebody and give them a membership if that's what you wanted to do, you know. A lot of people have said that.
Now, Dr. Ballard came here yesterday and told us a lot of the same information that Dr. Garrett did. She diagnosed the defendant with the same illnesses and, in her opinion, believed the acts were driven by that thought process. She told us that some of the things that the state seems to believe were deliberate acts or tries to persuade you to believe were things that she premeditated and thought out in her head before doing it are actually acts in support of that delusional compulsion. They were acts that were in her mind to finish out what she was being told to do, that she needed to not die. Getting a knife and locking the door are acts that are can be attributed to carrying out that delusion, is a way to act on that compulsion. I kept telling her she needed to kill herself. That's an explanation that's rooted in science and in psychology. She told us that these people in delusional states can do everyday things and appear like it's normal. She also told us that these Google searches show that Miss Driver was attempting to resist acting on those compulsions to the best of her ability. She sought ways out. She sought ways to get help. She was also able to explain to you from the psycho.
Cozy says, premeditation can be just a second, doesn't have to be days or weeks of planning. For example, I thought that you had to like go out of your way to plan to do something in order for it to be premeditation, but I could be wrong. Like I thought you had to do acts to show that you had been thinking about committing this crime and planning to do it for a while for it to be considered premeditation, but I could be wrong. Toxic, I am so happy for you. I am super over the moon for you. I'm so glad to hear that, love. I am so happy for you. The baby, okay. Well, we're still praying. Hopefully he'll be okay as well.
Psychological standpoint, that the statements made by Chloe to law enforcement
the Bellas
after the incident don't necessarily mean anything when you're talking about the mental state at the time.
Okay, so y'all were telling me that is correct. It could be just a second beforehand. Okay, thank you for letting me know that because I did not know that. Thank you for that.
Of the crime. She also talked about the jail calls and continued communication that Chloe had with Mr. Benmichael, and explained it in the context of not only Chloe's mental health issues, but in the context of her experiences while she lived in that relationship. The state played you a few phone calls in this particular case, all including her mother. What it tells us, based on those calls that you listened to, is the true depths of her mental illness and her entanglement to him. The jail calls you listened to still show that even when she was incarcerated, she was still controlled and manipulated by him. Notice
you don't think they have proven the insanity component. Okay, I can see that. I question it. This is a very complex case that requires a lot of thought process. Hey, Gammy, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you and welcome in.
How they didn't play any of the conversations with Mr. Benmichael. She also told us that people who are mentally ill, who have not received therapy, who have not been properly medicated, make irrational choices. The jail is not a therapeutic environment, and that to treat all of Chloe's issues, a great deal of treatment was needed, not just medication, to break that bond. Her testimony, Dr. Zom testified today, really didn't dispute any of the other two doctors in this case. She told you that Chloe was suffering from the same type of delusions and mental illness in the months and leading up to this event, all the doctors are consistent with that understanding of her severe mental illness. They all agree that it was untreated, and based on their diagnoses, would only get worse the longer it remained untreated. Each of those doctors agreed that the delusions that Ms. Driver experienced grew more and more pointed to the idea that she needed to kill herself and ultimately her child. Dr. Zom also agreed that the specific delusions that Chloe was experiencing on December the 8th culminated in the final delusion regarding the dirty shirt, and that was a sign she was unable to overcome. Now, I just want to talk briefly a little bit about the treatment of the experts in this case by the district attorney's office, and I think that this needs to be discussed. Mr. Fogus spent a lot of time yesterday with Dr. Ballard, trying to emphasize some perceived bias as a defense expert. Neither Dr. Ballard, nor Dr. Zom, nor Dr. Garrett have any interest in this case other than providing you an expert professional opinion regarding her mental state at the time the crimes were committed. They have all told you that their roles in these cases is not based on reaching a particular result. No defense attorney ever contacts them or contacts any expert and asks them, hey, we need you to do a particular thing for us. At the end of the day, all of the doctors who shared all the same title and the same qualifications, in essence, reached the same general ideas in this particular case. If any of these evaluators believed that she did not suffer from mental illness or had these delusions, none of us would be here today.
I agree with that, but my question is, are her delusions enough to make her not understanding of what she's going to do when she did what she did? Because she did what she did with the full intent to take out herself and the baby. Like, I mean, and it wasn't a delusion. She didn't think the baby was a demon. It was a direct result of her beliefs in the cult. Like, that's what it was, a direct result of that. So that's my problem. Like, I don't know. Like, I really don't know. I don't think she was delusional at the time, but that's just my thought. Oh, thank you, Gammy.
This is just not how these evaluations work. Now, I think it's important when we talk about Dr. McClendon that you all realize we called her as a witness in our case. The state didn't call her. She became involved in this case because she is employed by the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. She works for the state. She was provided all of the information in this case that the state could give her to review prior to talking to Ms. Driver. Whether or not Ms. Cropper or Mr. Fogus want to acknowledge it, she was their expert. And their expert agreed with Dr. Zom and Dr. Ballard. She worked for the state. We didn't involve her in this case. We had no choice in Dr. Garrett. See, in response to our evaluation, Ms. Cropper sent a referral to the Department of Behavioral Health. Now, granted, Ms. Cropper doesn't get to pick which particular forensic psychologist is assigned to evaluate a defendant. But in this case, the state's own expert, the one who conducted the evaluation on behalf of the state of Georgia, sat up here and told you similar things that Dr. Ballard came in here and told you. Did you see Mr. Fogus or Ms. Cropper attack Dr. Garrett personally when we called her as a witness? No. And she made very similar findings and told you about that here in court. If they didn't like any of the reports in this case, the state could have at any time in the last 3.5 years requested an evaluation by a doctor of their choice. I ask you this, would it have mattered? The answer to that question is no. They all agree she was severely mentally ill and suffering from these delusions. She needed to kill herself and her child. They just don't like that the experts don't align with their theory of this case. Now, the experts are hired to conduct an evaluation in the area of their expertise. They don't give you a particular result. It's not how the system works. Dr. Ballard told you she's done a lot of criminal responsibility evaluations, and maybe less than 10% of those evaluations have yielded an opinion of not guilty by reason of insanity. Dr. Garrett told you she works for the state of Georgia and testifies for both the state and the defense. And yet they came in here and told you similar things. If the Cherokee County District Attorney's Office believed that none of these doctors conducted a thorough and accurate assessment of Ms. Driver in the last 3.5 years, they could have done something about it.
I mean, she's providing a good closing argument as well.
The state knows what we all know in this case, that if Chloe was in her right mind, she would never have killed that baby. If Chloe had gotten the help she needed, she would have never harmed her baby or herself. If Chloe had not been in an abusive, controlling relationship with a man more than twice her age, her already existing mental health issues could have been treated. There is absolutely no motive in this case to kill her daughter or herself. There is no reason other than what was related to those psychotic symptoms and delusions she was under on December 8th of 2020.
I agree with that. I agree that if she had not been in that relationship, in that cult-like mentality with these people, that, yeah, I don't think at all she would have ever done that. I think it was a direct result of this. But is that delusion enough to not understand right from wrong is the problem.
It is now your job to set aside those emotions.
You can talk
about the death of him.
Cozy.
The evidence shows at the time of the crime, she was not only suffering from delusions, they were telling her she needed to die, that she didn't have the ability to distinguish right from wrong. While in this delusional state, the experts told us that everything in her mind was telling her that she needed to die. There's evidence that showed she tried to resist giving in to these thoughts. There is evidence that showed she did not, in these delusions and altered states of mind, she didn't know what she was doing. She didn't know what right from wrong. There is evidence to show that because of her delusions telling her that she and Hannah needed to die, that she was overmastered by the constant voices telling her, you need to die, in her head.
I'd like to know, everybody else, like if somebody feels differently than I do, I'd love for you guys to tell me in the comment section, or if you're watching the replay, why you feel that way, because I like to know the thought processes of other people. I want to know your perspectives as well and what you think and why you think that. So don't feel like you can't say anything, Trixie, my love. I don't think they gave the instructions yet, Toxic. I think that they're just doing closing arguments today. And I think the prosecution is going to come back for a second closing.
And ultimately acted on them. All of this started with undiagnosed and untreated mental illness that resulted in a truly horrible, tragic act. Let me put a few things in perspective that may have helped prevent this from happening in the first place. If Benjamin, Sarah, and Jessica or Jason had gotten Chloe help instead of CBD, or ignoring the reality that was right before their eyes every day, Hannah may still be alive. If the Asheville Police Department had arrested Jason and Benjamin on November 25th for the incident where they assaulted Sandra Torres that day, Chloe may have been able to get away and get the help that she needed, and Hannah may be alive today. If Brian had not taken Hannah from Chloe on November 26th of 2020, when he found out her parents were coming to get them, it's fair to say that she might have been able to break away from that relationship if he hadn't left with her daughter. Chloe was never going to leave without her daughter.
Oh,
Her testimony from Chloe's mom about how she had no idea about the extreme nature of this relationship until it was too late.
Manchester Vicky, I just saw that you were in here when I was talking to Yami. Hey, and thank you for being here.
They didn't have any idea about the mental health struggles. She didn't confide in them because he had convinced her that she couldn't trust her own parents. Every single day, her parents live with regrets and think about those what ifs. What if they had just tried harder? What if they had called the police? What if they had just taken Hannah?
Yep, bad girl. They sure do.
It replays in their mind over and over again. Her parents still say, if we had tried harder to get through to Chloe, Hannah may still be alive today.
Hey, Zio, can you put in the chat? Okay, she just dropped it right now. Thank you, lovely.
Look at all the times that Chloe was unable to address these significant mental health issues.
Yep, Maddie.
Those failures led to a deep and darker mental state. They caused Chloe to lose her way as a mother to this child. To that end, I agree with the state. She failed in her ultimate responsibility to protect her child. But the failure of her motherly duties was caused entirely by her untreated mental health crisis. It is clear that but for that paranoia, her hallucinations and her delusions, Chloe loved her daughter. And she fought in every way she knew how,
You're good,
and
Tom.
in the circumstances she was in, to resist those delusions to kill herself and her child. But when those things kept happening to her over and over and over again, and were so pervasive in her mind, that's all she could see. She tried to fight it. She was
Yeah, everybody's having a good day, Manchester. The opening to this live was real upsetting, but now we're in this and we're talking about this. I think everybody's having a good day. I hope you are.
voicing these concerns to everyone. She was telling these people, let me be with her. Help me, get me help.
Yep, CJ.
We can see it on December the 8th.
You're good,
We
Sarah.
can see that she was having these delusions, beginning with the 12 tribes, associating the discussion that they were having that day about death as a sign that reinforced that earlier delusion. We talked about the paranoia that she experienced at Whole Foods, the delusion about that room in the house, and being alone, and that ultimate final delusion of the dirty shirt that overwhelmed her ability, and she gave in.
That's
Now, the
pretty-
court's going to give you instructions regarding the law for you to consider in this case. It is now your job to apply that law to the evidence that you have heard over the course of the last week. As Ms. Cropper kind of touched on briefly, you're going to be given a verdict form that allows you to decide this case in 4 different ways. The not guilty, guilty, guilty by mentally ill, or not guilty by reason of insanity. In order to find Chloe guilty of the charged offenses, you need to find that she committed the acts and that she had the required intent. And the state has to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. The judge will charge you about what it means to be find someone beyond a reasonable doubt. The option of guilty but mentally ill does not yield the same results as a not guilty by reason of insanity. And I want you to keep
I'm not sure. I'm sure they'll go over the penalties, but I don't know if they've mentioned it yet, Maddie.
that in your head. A finding of not guilty by reasonable insanity, and the judge is going to give you an instruction on this, allows this court to maintain the custody and control over an individual for the evaluation and treatment of her mental health needs. And that can be indefinite. The law allows a person to be found not guilty by reason of insanity if they did not have the mental capacity to distinguish between right and wrong at the time of the crime. The law allows this because because of mental disease, she acted in such a way that that delusional compulsion overwhelmed and overmastered her will to resist. Now, we've all talked about the delusions and what a delusional compulsion really is, but in this case, she was compelled to act in this manner because in her mind, she believed she was right. She believed if the facts were as she believed them to be in her head, she was right. The testimony you've heard in this case was that these delusions were directing her to die. There is evidence to show that she experiences these delusions of reference, these auditory and visual hallucinations, these command hallucinations, paranoia. You heard testimony that Chloe believed based on that delusion, she was downloading all of herself into Hannah and viewed her as an extension of herself. You heard Dr. Ballard tell you that the people with these type of disorders have a very difficult time distinguishing boundaries or when one person ends and another begins. You've heard testimony that people suffering from the same illnesses as Chloe are often unable to distinguish the boundaries. She didn't necessarily know where Hannah began or ended. She didn't know where she began, where she ended. She viewed her in her mind as one unit. She was not going to leave behind any piece of her in this world to perpetuate that ongoing sin, which told her she needed to die. It is all part of the delusion.
So I could see that as a delusion. I mean, if you think that you are full of sin to the extent that you need to die and the child is an extension of yourself, because, they tell you when you breastfeed, you're giving everything in your body to that child through your breast milk. So you need to make sure you eat healthy and you're getting all the vitamins and nutrition that you need so that your baby can in turn get that. The thing about breast milk is that actually your body creates everything that your baby needs. So it's the best way to feed your child, in my opinion. But taking all of that into account, I could see the delusion. But you had to know, I understand the delusion and I understand the disorder where you don't understand, you have an issue with boundaries of knowing where you end and the baby begins. But I still don't know if it's going to be enough for her to get not guilty by reason of insanity. I don't know, CJ. I don't know. That's a good question, though. Really, bad girl?
Now, the state began their opening statement and again today asking you for justice for Hannah. We agree. There is justice for Hannah in this case if you find her not guilty by reason of insanity. There is no doubt that our client committed these horrific acts. Never contested that. I want to be clear, though, that in this case, justice looks different than what we're used to. Our society has certain ideas about mental illness and has created a very strong perception that mental illness is an excuse for someone who commits a crime. The law recognizes that severely mentally ill people cannot perform the required criminal intent to commit a crime. The law allows you to find Chloe not guilty by reason of insanity if you believe at the time of the crime she was suffering from mental illness and that she did not have the ability to distinguish right from wrong. You're also allowed to find her not guilty by reason of insanity if you believe that due to her mental illness, she was suffering from a delusional compulsion that overmastered her will to resist committing the act. We know that Miss Driver was in a delusional state. She was confused as to what was right and what was wrong, and resisted acting on those delusions for a long time. In that type of mindset, in the throes of a severe psychotic episode, there is no way she had the ability to distinguish right from wrong at that time.
But, okay, now I have a problem because you just said she had felt these delusions for a while and kind of kept it at bay because she knew it was wrong. But now you're telling me she didn't know right from wrong in the midst of these delusions, to put it in a nutshell. I could be understanding that wrong, but if you've had these delusions and felt this way for a number of years, but kept it at bay up until this point, that's telling me that you knew it was wrong. But that's just my, allegedly speculating over here. Rubber Ramada room, mental illness is a very broad term. It's like a blanket term for so many tentacles of horrendous feelings and emotions and things that people go through.
And she was left untreated. And she got worse and worse. Now, Ms. Robert talked to you a little bit about the delusional compulsion part of that, but we know from the evidence in this case that she was severely mentally ill, that she was suffering from delusions that compelled her to act in a particular manner. That if right, that would have been right if she had believed, if they had been as she believed them to be. If you find that Miss Driver, based on those delusions, that she believed her actions were right, and as she believed them to be, she would be justified. The evidence has been clear that she needed to kill herself, and by extension, Hannah. She could not separate her identities at that particular time. Now, I want to tell you, suicide in and of itself is not a crime. In her mind, She was being told to kill herself and any part of her. Her intention, based on those delusions, is to follow through on that. And the delusions were telling her to commit suicide.
That's sweet, Sarah.
Those right actions in her mind are what led to those events. As I told you, this case has always been about the why. And I think you just need to think about this in the context of how we got here today. Chloe was a young, naive individual with pre-existing mental health issues. She already walked in with that baseline to this relationship. She suffered years of abuse, coercive control, and a cult mentality. We've heard about, she asked for help, she cried for help, and attempted to leave. We've heard that all the experts agree that she was suffering from severe mental health issues, and that untreated, undiagnosed individuals treating those type of illnesses get worse over time. They just don't go away. As we told you in the beginning of this case, mothers just do not kill their children. We told you to ask yourself what drives someone to do something like this to their baby and themselves. What drives someone to stab themselves 5 times in the neck and once in the heart? What drives someone to do this by someone who all reports loved and cared for that child in the most amazing way? And the only explanation is those severe psychotic symptoms and delusions.
Now, I could agree with that. I mean, you're not going to stab yourself 5 times in the neck, and I think she said once in the chest if you're trying to fake it. Again, just like Richard Allen's not going to eat his feces if he's trying to fake psychosis. So, I mean, I can understand it from that perspective.
She was experiencing. Now, I want to be clear. A finding of not guilty by reason of insanity does not mean that she walks out of this courtroom or is not held accountable for her actions that day. It means that she is committed to the state hospital to get the treatment she needs. Justice in this case for Hannah is getting her mother the treatment she so desperately needs. A verdict of not guilty by reason of insanity is not an excuse. It is a way the law allows an individual in Chloe's position to be held accountable based on those things. It is the why. It does not mean she's not held accountable. It does not mean there's no justice for Hannah. It means she gets the treatment and the help she needs. The only verdict in this case supported by the evidence to each and every count on that indictment is not guilty by reason of insanity to each and every count, because we have met the burden that we have that she could not distinguish right from wrong, and that she was overcome and overmastered by those delusional compulsions that in her mind justify that act. Thank you.
So far, they both had really good closing arguments. Cozy says she needs to be in a mental hospital for sure. She does. She needs to get the help that she needs. Bellis, you stay safe, lovely. With the storms going on. Let me see if we need to skip. I'm sure the defense is going to come right back. Basil, hold on. Yeah, she's about to come up right now. Basil. He's wanting all the lovin's. No, I haven't. I'll have to look into the Bobby Joe Stinnett case.
Ms. Trethewey just stood up here and said
Here's
that
the defense
if
again.
Chloe believed her actions were right, then she would be justified. That's not the law. And she's conflating the 2 different ways to prove insanity. Her ability to distinguish between right from wrong and delusional compulsion. The 2 don't overlap. Those are 2 different ways to prove insanity. If she just said to you, if Chloe believed in her mind she was justified, then she's insane. That's not the law either. And you don't have to believe me. The judge will tell you. The delusion, if true, would have legally justified the act. if we assume what was in her mind, it is legally justifiable under Georgia's self-defense laws. That's the law. It doesn't matter.
CJ says, especially it's not superficial wounds. That's the main thing she has going for her, because this doesn't mean she didn't know it was wrong. Right. And that's the problem for me. Like exactly what you just said. It doesn't mean that she didn't know right from wrong, but it's also not superficial wounds either. So yeah, and how the prosecution closes this case will mean a lot.
It doesn't matter what Chloe thought was justified. The only thing that matters with regard to her distinction between wrong and right is the other part of the insanity charge, whether she had the ability to distinguish between right and wrong. When we're talking about whether the delusion was as to a fact, if true, would justify the act, we're talking about legal justification under the laws of Georgia, not about what Chloe Driver thinks about it. It's also important to me to address the fact that Ms. Strathaway indicated the state wants you to ignore all this stuff about her mental state. They just put up all this gory evidence to play on your emotions, even though Ms. Driver has never disputed the fact that she committed these acts. Except she has. She pled not guilty. We have the burden of proving the murder. I have to. It is my job. I'm not going to phone it in when we have a murder of a 13-month-old child just because I know her defense is insanity. I still, under the law, I have the burden of proving the murder. And I'm going to put up every ounce of evidence that I need to put up in order to do that. And that is not to play on your emotions. The fact that it was emotional, and the fact that it's horrific, and the fact that that body cam is going to haunt all of our dreams for a very long time is because of the actions of Chloe Driver, not because I'm trying to manipulate you. The state has a duty, and our duty is to represent Hannah. She was murdered in Cherokee County, and we have to prove her guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And my presentation of evidence to you in that regard was following my oath. It was not to manipulate you or to convince you to ignore anything. I don't want you to ignore any evidence that came before you. Ms. Strathaway said, well, the state could have gotten another evaluation if they wanted to. None of the evaluations that have come before you meet the definition of legal insanity. Why would we keep asking for evaluations? It's their burden to prove insanity, and they haven't done it. Because none of the evaluations demonstrate that she doesn't understand the difference between right and wrong, or that she had any specific delusions that, if true, would justify the act, if true, would allow her to defend herself against Hannah.
I mean, she's absolutely right. They have the burden to prove what happened, and the defense has to prove that it happened because she was legally insane and didn't know right from wrong, and they haven't done that, in my opinion. So she's absolutely right.
She can be evaluated by 10 more doctors. There's no evidence in this case that she meets the definition of legal insanity. And the state has never tried to pull the wool over your eyes or ask you to ignore evidence or ask you to be distracted. We have just asked you to focus on the actual issues in this case. And the fact of the matter is, it is their burden to prove insanity. It is not our burden. She is presumed sane under the law. It is our burden to prove the murder. It is their burden to prove insanity.
I would go to the UK and or British Columbia. Both places look amazing to me.
I want to talk to you about some of the evidence that came before you. And one of the things that we need to talk about is Jason Spillers. I know everybody in the free world was questioning the wisdom of my decision to put this man on the witness stand and let.
Yes, we were. If you guys haven't heard the article where it talks about what he did, and I read text messages that he sent to underage girls talking about their hymen better be intact. Sorry for dropping that bomb on you. Trigger warning. It's in the lab where there's a picture of him in a orange suit. If you guys want to see that, this man is something else, to say the least.
Let him ramble on incessantly. I promise you, it was not because I am a pea-brained female who is not capable of intelligent thought like Mr. Spillers would like you to believe. He provided some very valuable information, and he provided context to some things that you needed to have. There were statements made by Chloe Driver in this case about his new friends in the group, about her new existence, about how things had changed when he had gotten these new followers. Who do you think she's talking about? Old Crazy Pants. And he took this witness stand and talked about drinking his own pee, talking about all of his crazy views about women and their inferiority and how they're not capable of intelligent thought. And most of what he had to say was complete garbage. And I expect that most of what he had to say, you all will probably completely disregard. But what became very clear is that him and Benjamin had this little intellectual bromance. And they probably sat around and acted like they were the two smartest men who ever lived on the face of the planet. And things got different for Chloe and Hannah and the other women because Benjamin was in this little romance with his smart buddy, Jason Spillers, and the women were supposed to giggle and play and go do the things that women do because they're not smart enough to participate in intelligent thought. And so things got...
That's exactly what he testified to. I mean, in a nutshell, and it was horrible. CJ, LA is horrible, and so is New York, in my opinion. I live in North Carolina. I don't know if you know where that's at, but it's like quiet and calm here for the most part, unless you go into like the big cities like Raleigh or something. But it's usually quiet and calm. So don't judge the United States on LA because from what I've never been there either, but from what I understand, that place is crazy and not the best representation of our beautiful nation.
Different for Chloe Driver, and she didn't like it. Those were her statements. You seeing it with your own two eyes, what her existence was.
She did say crazy.
Her wanting to get far away from Jason Spillers is not insane. That's reasonable because everybody in this courtroom felt the same way. They did not want to be around him because he was difficult to be around. And so he needed to come before you. You needed to see that with your own two eyes because it provides context to her statements about why she did what she did and why she was feeling the way she felt. And what were those statements? We knew that Jason Spillers was...
Hey, Steph sells stuff by the seashore. Says, hey, I love LA and New York City. Both great representations, art and culture galore. That they do have. There is a lot of art and culture there. What I meant was like as far as fast pace. I'm sorry if I did not make that clear. What I meant is like it's super fast. There's lots of people, lots of crowding, lots of noise, lots of lights. It all depends on, if you like that stuff, then that's great. So I didn't mean any offense by that. And I appreciate you saying that. What I mean is like North Carolina is more quiet and slow. I actually went to Boston, Massachusetts when I was 17, and it was like a different world to me because everybody moved so fast. It seemed like time was faster there. And that's kind of what I mean by it. I didn't mean any disrespect. Thank you for being here. Lovely.
Was new to this group and that he had met Z in April of 2020. Chloe's been in the picture for 3 years, and it was just the last couple of months when things really went to go sideways. And it was after he joined the group.
Catherine says she's guilty. Tell me your thoughts on this, Lovely. Thank you for being here.
This is telling. He started spending a lot of time with them around July of 2020, and it definitely provided context for her statements to the detective. The first thing she wrote about why she did it. He didn't do it, I did it. I was going insane. I no longer wanted to be with his friends, but kept coming back for him. I only wanted my baby and husband, but he refused. When she said, I no longer wanted to be with his friends, she's talking about Jason Spillers. And
Thank you, Steph. That's so sweet. I appreciate that. I'm glad you've been here. And thank you for listening, Lovely.
Needed to see it. You needed to see it because her reasons and her motivation behind committing this act wasn't her delusions, it was her reality. It was the day-to-day life that she was subjected to, having to be around these two men. Her motivation was her reality, not her delusion. And you saw it. She told us why. When I stood up here in my opening statements, I said, pay attention to the why. It will help you solve the legal equation. It will help you put the pieces together. Why did she commit this act? This is when she was writing to Benjamin. No, I went to get a knife. I couldn't handle being with the group anymore, and you left me no alternative with certain threats. Taking the money and not letting me just buy land and be with her as long as I needed. You had the whole group to take care of and blamed me for all the problems.
CJ, I'm
These
so
were her
sorry.
statements to Benjamin. She was fed up. She didn't want to be with this group. She didn't want to be with his friends. She wanted a normal life for her baby. She did not want him to keep recruiting more wives and more people to have to take care of and divide the attention even more. These were her statements.
Catherine says, I don't think she's insane. I think that's what we've been going back and forth with. Like, was she insane enough to not know right from wrong when she did what she did? Because, I mean, you know, she knew when she did the act that she did that she was going to unalive herself and the baby was her intention. So she knew what the end result would be. Therefore, can she be insane? We've been battling back and forth with that all day. And I appreciate you telling us your thoughts here. Catherine says she could have gotten away. She was at her parents' house for a couple of days before the unaliving. Yeah, she could have. It's hard. Like when you're in an abusive relationship, you do end up going back, but you're absolutely right about that. I'm so sorry, CJ, that happened. Steph sells stuff by the seashore says, I think she should have testified if she wanted a chance after those phone calls. Yeah, I've heard that those phone calls were very telling. They usually don't like you to testify in your own defense because the prosecution gets to rip you a new one. But yeah, I would have liked an explanation for those as well.
I just wanted to have a normal life for Nimsy. These were the very first statements that she was making to the people she cares about, her mom, Benjamin, and to the detectives in the case about why she committed the act. None of this is delusional. It is all very, very rooted in her reality, which was a living hell. These are her notes to the doctor that evaluated her shortly after she was hospitalized. I was stating.
Catherine, yeah, somebody said it's been about 600 times she's called him since she's been in jail.
For months, I couldn't handle my husband's lifestyle anymore.
Yes.
She didn't want to be around all these people. He collects people to live with us. And after we got 3 more people, Sarah, Jessica, Jason, I started perceiving them as ganging up on me and leaving me out and changing stories. She's referencing the existence that was her reality.
Eek, I'll drop it in Discord if we don't. We're probably not going to have time to go over the phone calls today. If we don't, I will drop them in Discord and make sure you get to listen to them. Maybe we can listen to them together.
She is not referencing delusions.
Right.
And you saw 4 hours from Jason Spillers, which was a little glimpse of what every day of her life must have been like. For the first 2 years, not so much because it was just us traveling. But once he got people listening to him more, I started feeling scared and was begging for attention for us to be with the baby. These were the things that she wrote about why she committed these acts. They're not delusional. They're reasonable.
She's right.
Because wanting a husband and a child and not being in a cult, that's not unreasonable. That's not irrational. It's not delusional. That is a reasonable thought process.
Yep.
It was just the realities of her situation that she chose to commit the act she did because she could not deal with the reality of the situation that she chose to put herself in. The doctor who evaluated her in the hospital, patient felt the only way out was to kill her daughter and herself. He did not notate that she killed her daughter because of any delusions. He notated that her motivation for committing the act was because her and her daughter, it was the only way for them to get out. And that is not a delusion. And that is certainly not a delusion that, if true, would justify the act under the self-defense laws.
I didn't know that, Cozy. Cozy said, they believe that most people are not real. So I wonder if she thought her baby wasn't real. I didn't know they thought that, but no, because I think that she knew the intent of her act. She knew what was going to happen when she committed that act. And again, that's the biggest issue for me. Even though she could have been brainwashed or quote unquote delusional because she was in a cult and believing what they said and what they made her believe, that she was evil and her child by proxy was evil as well. Even taking all that into account, the end result was still the same. The end goal was still the same, to unalive yourself and unalive the baby. Therefore, I don't think it's cause for an insanity plea. I don't.
This is not criminal insanity. This is her making a decision out of desperation because of the situation that was her reality.
Yeah, I get that, Cozy.
She told us why she did it. November 25th of 2020, she Googles killing someone to save them. This is consistent with what all the doctors said about what she said about her feelings about Hannah. The last doctor, Dr. Zom, said essentially the overarching theme of things, whether they were rooted in her religious beliefs or rooted in her delusions, the overarching theme was, saving her daughter from a life of suffering. And that's consistent with what we know she Googled on November the 25th. And that is not a delusion that, if true, would justify the act. It is not insanity under the law. She was not motivated by her delusions or her insanity. She was motivated by her reality.
Steph, I'm going to get with you if I go to New York or LA so you can show me around.
And I think what kind of highlights that is, ironically, the testimony of Gabriella Kuykendall, Benjamin's ex-wife. She said it was difficult to leave. She said she doesn't have mental health problems and she thought about killing herself. It was a difficult existence that they found themselves in. And she wasn't delusional at all.
Cozy said, imagine someone with a vulnerable mental state, possibly schizo, being brainwashed by these pee drinking weirdos who think that most people aren't real, etc. Benjamin. Yeah, I agree. And I see that. I can see that. But again, I mean, and I respect that. And I enjoy this conversation with you because I like to hear other people's opinions. I love to hear your thought process and why you think that way. I just think that the end result, in order to plead insanity, you had to, in that state of mind, either think the child, like, for example, think the child was a demon and you had to protect yourself from the demon, or not know right from wrong and not know basically that it was wrong to murder your child. And I don't think either of those things are true in this instance. You know what I mean? Yeah, and that's what, and I like that. I understand you're not trying to defend her, you're just trying to see every angle. And I get that, and I try to do the same, and I respect that, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
She thought about just ending it, not because
we
of
should,
delusions, but because of reality, because of the circumstances that they experienced.
Probably eat.
I want to talk to you about the evidence that demonstrates that she understood the ability to distinguish between right and wrong. Dr. Ballard indicated, when asked if she thought her behavior was wrong, Chloe Driver expressly said, yeah, as soon as it happened, I regretted it. I thought I shouldn't have done this. This was not supposed to happen. Dr. Garrett, she recalled apologizing to Hannah and told her daughter how much she loved her. I knew this was wrong from the beginning. These are the statements that she made from her own mouth to these doctors. And Dr. Zom, who testified last, said, that's not inconsistent with my assessment of the situation. You saw one of the first things that she wrote was, how long is my prison sentence going to be for killing her? It was very, very clear that she appreciated the consequences of her actions.
I agree that.
She understood the wrongfulness of it, but she still did it. This was not an inability to distinguish between right and wrong. She chose to kill Hannah knowing it was wrong. And she said that out of her own mouth. Now, when we talk about the delusional compulsion, I gave you the law, and I want to just refresh your memory on it one more time because it was misstated by Ms. Trethewey. The defendant has to be laboring under the delusion at the time of the commission of the act. The criminal act itself has to be connected with the particular delusion, and it has to be as to a fact that, if true, would justify the act under Georgia self-defense laws. And we talked about that. In order to justify the act, she would have to believe that that force, that killing her, was necessary to prevent serious bodily injury or death to herself, or to prevent Hannah from committing a forcible felony. There's zero evidence of that. There is no evidence and no possible way that this third rung of the delusional compulsion insanity defense can be met. Dr. Garrett, when she testified, she indicated she did not ask Chloe any questions about the cult dynamics or the conflict in the cult, despite the notes that Chloe wrote in the hospital, the ones that we just talked about, the ones that sort of demonstrated what her motivation for committing the act was. The doctor did not ask her about the dynamics of the group, did not ask her about the cult culture. She also did not ask her any details about the crime itself. She didn't give me details about what she was doing in that room, what the play-by-play was. If your inquiry is what was her state of mind at the time she committed the act, then the circumstances surrounding the act are really important. And Dr. Garrett instead said she didn't find it to be particularly relevant. She said, I asked her what she was thinking and how she was feeling. Except for Dr. Garrett is not her therapist. This is a question of legal insanity. It is a question of law. And Ms. Trethewey indicated that Dr. Garrett is the state's expert. Dr. Garrett works for a state agency in the same way that, like, a teacher might be a state employee. She's not the state's expert. We didn't hire her. We didn't retain her. The facts that came before you is I sent her a referral form after there was a court order for her to complete an assessment. Dr. Roberta Ballard is a private doctor that was hired by the defense. Then the state agency did an evaluation of her. Then an independent expert did an evaluation of her. That is all very common procedure in criminal cases. So when she says this is the state's expert, it is the state's expert in the context of she works for a state agency, but not
I don't know if they offered her a plea or not.
the state of Georgia that is prosecuting this case. She is not affiliated with us. I want to talk to you about, I completed this chart with her on the stand. And I said, tell me what the delusions were. Give them to me. What did she say were the delusions? Because this jury is going to have to make decisions about what the particular delusion was that she was laboring under, whether it was connected to the act, and whether that delusion, if true, justified the act. That's your legal equation. And so,
most of the time the age of consent is 16. I do believe in most places it's 16 or 17. I'm gonna see if she had got offered a plea deal on my phone real quick for you, bad girl.
we went through these. And so she indicated the particular delusions connected with the act of murdering Hannah was that everything was telling her to do it. People talking about death, thinking she should do it. Seeing knives. So let's play that out for a minute. Here's a knife. I see it. We're going to assume that everything in my head is true. And my head is telling me that everybody in this jury box is telling me to take this knife and go stab Mr. Focus. So if we assume that's true, that all 14 of you, 15 of you, are telling me, Katie, take that knife and go stab him. Do it. Take the knife, go stab him. Would I be legally justified in doing that? No. Absolutely not. Just because the whole world and the whole room wants me to kill him, it doesn't mean I'm legally justified in doing it. And that's what I mean when I say that if we assume it's true, it has to justify the act. And that's why it's really a narrow category, very narrow category of cases where the person that gets killed or harmed is perceived in their mind to be an immediate threat to them. Hannah would have to be an immediate threat to her.
That's a good way for her to put it. And it is very intriguing to think of it that way. Abellis, you're good, baby. And thank you so much for being here.
Mr. Fobus, if I looked at him and I was having a distorted thinking or a delusional thought and I thought he was about to hurt me, and we assume that my delusional thinking is true, then maybe I'd be justified in defending myself and hurting him back.
Miss Chloe Driver
But
offered.
that is not the evidence in this case. And none of these delusions, which ones, if true, would justify the act? And the answer is 0. There are none. Absolutely not a shred of evidence that she ever thought Hannah was a harm to her or anybody else.
All it's showing me right now is just stuff from the trial, and it's saying that she pled not guilty. So I don't know if they would I don't think they tried to offer her a plea deal because, I mean, they didn't really have a reason to anyway, because, I mean, the evidence all points to what she did. And if they felt strong enough in their case to prove that she was not insane at the time, I don't know that they would have offered her a plea deal. But I'm not picking up anything on it as of right now.
Dr. Ballard, when she was asked about things that Chloe Driver actually said close in time to the crime, which is the handwritten notes, I asked her about Mr. Focus asked her about the handwritten notes. She indicated that it's misguided to assume that anything she said a day later is controlling. But the fact of the matter is, the legal question is what her state of mind was at the time she committed the offense. Lots of people gain insight into their behavior and their actions and the things that they did as time goes on. But the pertinent question for you is, what was her state of mind in the moment that she committed the offense? So in that regard, don't you think that her statements close in time, her condition close in time, her mental state close in time is the most relevant? And she just disregarded it. The question is, what was her mental state at the time of the crime? I really do not want to revisit all these body cameras gratuitously, but she is making statements and I need you to hear them. She has presence of mind. She understands the situation. She says repeatedly, let him be with her.
Let's get to 39, bro. Let's get to 39. Come on. Take him. Come on, go downstairs.
Trigger warning, I apologize.
She's not delusional. She's oriented. She knows exactly what's happening. She wants the baby's dad to be able to be with her when she dies. She understands the severity of the situation. She is mentally there. The EMT calls Hannah a boy, and she corrects him. She says it's a he.
I didn't realize that was her talking.
And Chloe says it's a girl. She has a severe presence of mind. She knows exactly what is happening in that room. She says, is that it? That's goodbye? She understands the consequence of her decision to stab that baby. She understands that her death is impending, and she understands the wrongness of her actions. And she shows us that in the minutes after she committed the act.
I mean, and it doesn't get any more raw than that. Like, if she is in presence, like if she's present enough to say those things, I don't think this was a delusion. I don't think that she can plead insanity, honestly.
She asks whether Hannah's still alive. She is not delusional or unclear about what she just did or why she did it. She has presence of mind. She understands the consequences. She understands the permanency, and she understands the result. Dr. Ballard focused primarily on Chloe Driver being a victim of coercive control. There was a lot of testimony about her being a domestic violence victim. And one of the things that Ms. Trethewey said that maybe just landed a little wrong for me is that, you know, everybody at this table, this goes against everything that they've ever been trained to believe about domestic violence victims. And the thing is, I've been a prosecutor for 17 years, and I've done nothing but crimes against women and children my entire career. And I've encountered a lot of domestic violence victims. And I've never stood up here and told you that Chloe Driver didn't experience domestic violence. I have never said that, and I'm not going to say that. What I have said is that Chloe Driver didn't experience any domestic violence in Cherokee County, so we have nothing to prosecute. We have jurisdiction over the crimes that were committed in Cherokee County, which was the murder of Hannah Driver. And the other thing I know about domestic violence victims is they don't get a free pass under the law to murder their children. No matter how bad their situation is, the law still has to apply to them. Just because they have experienced something terrible in their life does not give them the right to murder innocent, defenseless little children. And that is not because we don't care about domestic violence victims. It's because the matter before us and the crime committed in Cherokee County and the relevant issues in this case are not domestic violence. They're murder of a child.
That was in the courtroom. Eek says that's why she reaches out to the only man who breadcrumbs her, hence the 600 phone calls. She's obviously probably hated at the jail and has no answers to anything, right? Rubber, you're good, honey. You're fine. I appreciate you being here. Bad Girl says it's not looking good in my opinion. I agree.
It is clear that some of these experts and the defense really don't place any responsibility on Ms. Driver at all for any of her actions. And it's something I ask you to consider and think about in the context of a cult. Because in theory, if there is one cult leader and then there are all these cult followers, are we to believe that any criminal actions by anybody who joins this cult, they are no longer responsible for it? They don't have to answer for their choices and their decisions because there's one person that's manipulative and controlling at the top. So now all of a sudden everybody is absolved themselves of criminal responsibility and free will. But
I mean, in the Manson trial, they all went down. Every single one of them. Jenny, thank you for that. Jenny says, if you or anyone you love is going through domestic violence, please seek help. And remember, you are loved and you are worth more than that. And I agree. And thank you so much. I will be dropping the numbers in the description box below for you guys.
But that is not the law. You cannot join a cult or an oppressive situation or be in an abusive relationship and now the law no longer apply to you. You still have to answer for your decisions. You still have to suffer consequences of your criminal actions. The judge is going to tell you that the evidence that came before you about the abuse of Chloe Driver by Benjamin is really only relevant to for a very narrow reason. And the state was not trying to ask you to ignore anything or distract you or have you look away from things. It's just really not the question before you, whether or not she was abused. The judge is going to tell you that the only relevant purpose for that testimony is whether or not it sheds light on her mental state. That is relevant to her insanity defense. So to the extent that her abusive, controlling, oppressive situation, we've never said she didn't experience those things. She probably did. It's just not really the issue before you to diagnose or decide. But to what extent do those things have an impact on her mental state? And what I want to tell you is the defense expert kept using the term coercive control. And the truth is, coercion is not a defense to murder under the laws of the state of Georgia. So the only thing you're concerning yourself with in this case is whether or not she meets the definition of insanity under the law. And even if you take these abusive events and you think about, how they might have impacted her mental state, you still have to determine whether she meets the definition of insanity.
I'm so sorry, Jenny. If you ever need to talk, you know my email. I'm so sorry you ever had to deal with that. CJ says it's a complex. She has made friends also, had a fight. She speaks to her parents a lot and the wives and that creep. Talking about since she's been in jail, I'm assuming. Yeah.
You still got to go back to those two tests. Could she distinguish right from wrong? And was she suffering under the compulsion of delusion that, if true, would justify the act? So even assuming that you believe she was this oppressed victim of domestic violence by Benjamin, and you believe all the stuff about what her treatment was probably like, she still, in order for it to be a defense, has to meet the definition of insanity under the law. So you have to put that evidence about her treatment by Benjamin into the proper context, and the judge will tell you the only context that it is relevant to in this particular case in terms of solving the legal question before you is to what extent you think that impacted her ability to distinguish from right from wrong, and to what extent that impacted her delusions that were connected to the act, that, if true, would justify the act. And once you kind of do the math and do the equation, you will arrive at the conclusion that none of the delusions would justify the act legally, and that she clearly understood the permanency of her decision and the consequences of her actions. Dr. Ballard also did talk.
I apologize for pausing it right there. But again, I mean, I think she did understand the permanency of her decision and the consequence of her actions in that moment.
Talk a little bit about her diagnostic testing, and I think this is important to discuss. Miss Driver had an invalid score on her assessment, and she over-endorsed and over-reported symptoms. And so there was questioning by Mr. Fogus about that, because that's obviously concerning in the context of a forensic evaluation when the test scores essentially show that she's exaggerating. And it showed that she had a very high scores and that she had a motivated response. But when asked about it, the doctor basically indicated, well, it could mean that, she's trying to get herself out of trouble, but I just interpreted it as a cry for help. She chose instead to interpret it as she's just piling on all these extra symptoms and exaggerating her symptoms because she's desperate for help. But the fact of the matter is, she's already in the jail, she's already receiving mental health help, she's already medicated, she's already away from him, even though she's continuing to reach out to him and call him. So why did this expert choose to discount the possibility that Ms. Driver was potentially exaggerating her symptoms to benefit herself in a criminal case, and instead just chose to call this a cry for help? It's something.
Cozy, you're good, love. Thank you for being here. Zio says, I concur. Yeah, Cozy, have a good day, love. Bad Girl says, as soon as she's convicted, all the sister wives and hubby will disappear out of her life. That's going to be sad for her if that happens. Oh, hey, Joy. Thank you for being here. Yeah, we're listening to closing arguments, and then I'll have to go start dinner.
It's something to consider with regard to Ms. Driver, because we know some things about her. She's not dumb. She has above average intelligence, according to the last expert. She manipulated the doctors and the jail staff in order to get access to an unrecorded office line where she was supposed to speak to only her lawyer and her mother when she is in jail for murder. And she uses this unrecorded office line and abuses those privileges to continue to call him. Of course, once it's detected by us, they immediately revoke her privileges and put an end to it. But then what does she do? She continues to communicate with him after his number has been blocked by the jail, and intentionally does not share that information with the doctors that are evaluating her, because it doesn't fit into the narrative that she's desperately trying to escape him and she's being held against her will.
That is insane. She's supposed to only be calling the lawyer from this line, and she's calling him and talking to him, and then they block his number and she's still getting in touch with him. Wow. I mean, but that again is going to just show how manipulated she is. I guess you could. This case is wild, y'all.
State has never said she wasn't a domestic violence victim, but this narrative that she was held against her will and she couldn't leave and she had no access to money and he would take her phone, it's not true. Maybe he was controlling her mind, but the undisputed evidence is she had a phone in her bag, she had $1,000 in her bag, she had spent 2 days at her parents' house just days before she murdered her daughter. She didn't say anything to her parents about wanting to go get mental health help or thinking about killing her baby. Miss Trethewey stood up here and said, well, all these people could have done something to prevent it if Jason and Benjamin and Sarah and Jessica would have just gotten her help. But she was at her parents' house for 2 days, right before this happened. That video on November the 27th, when she said, he has my baby against my will, she went to her parents' house after that.
I'm sorry.
That's what the evidence was. And she said, Miss Trethewey stood up here in front of you and said she was not going to leave him without her baby. She had to go back to him. She was not going to leave him without her baby. The evidence is she was not going to leave him, period. Because her baby was dead. She murdered her baby. And then she continued to communicate with him for over 2 years. Murdering Hannah in her rational, medicated, stable state, understanding she murdered her own child, she continued to reach out to him and call him over 600 times. This wasn't about Hannah. Hannah could not be held over her head. Hannah could not be stolen away by Benjamin. Hannah was gone. Hannah was dead. And she still made that choice. And the thing is, there are consequences for choices. If you want to get away from somebody, there's no better place than the county jail, because
I can attest to that. I can attest to that. And she's given a good closing argument. CJ says, I can't lie, until yesterday, maybe my own bias and experience had me on her side until yesterday, even though I came in with an open mind and tried to, and I'm assuming there's probably a second part, but yeah, I was, leaning towards her side as well. But this is, you can't deny the things that are being shown here in these closing arguments either. It's definitely made me look at it differently.
he can't get in and he can't call you. But she found ways to get to him. She convinced 6 other inmates to use their phone pins for over 2 years so she could continue to contact him, and had 617 calls. All of this was while she was medicated and stable and not delusional. She learned from the best in terms of her ability to manipulate the process, manipulate the system. The evidence in this case is that these groups were fraudsters by trade. They had plans to go steal houses that were bank owned on Zillow. They had taken out all these COVID loans. They didn't have any insurance. They had all this trust documentation. They found out ways to get free cars. They had tons of money. None of these people had jobs, and they had a ton of money in the bank because they would just lie, cheat, and steal from the government in a way that benefited them. And the questioning of Dr. Zom at the end was, oh yeah, she understood. She knew the inner workings of how to game the system.
Wow.
She was very, very educated and knowledgeable about it. She told Dr. Zom she was 80 pounds when she entered the hospital, which was a under-report of 33 pounds from what her actual weight was. And maybe that's not a significant fact to you, but it's just a fact that's not true. It's just something that's not supported by objective, independent evidence. And so it's something to pay attention to. What is her motive in this case? How is she attempting to paint herself despite her intentional, repetitive conduct to the contrary?
Exactly. Her conduct is to the contrary, underlined, bold, italicized. Zayo said that, talking about the plea deal, from what she could find, the state had enough to convict her. So there, from what she's found, there's no other offerings. Thank you for that. I appreciate that, Lovely.
She had a conversation with her father just prior to being evaluated by Dr. Zom, where they discussed that she would be screwing herself if she acted normal in that evaluation. Those are things for y'all to consider. What she has to gain or lose in this case. What she might have to gain from over-exaggerating her symptoms. And why her statements at the hospital when she was at her lowest and she was sad and she was raw and she's just telling it, why those statements are really the more credible statements about what motivated her act.
Joy, I think she's 24 right now.
What did every expert agree on? Every single one. Dr. Zom, Dr. Ballard, Dr. Garrett, They all said she never believed Hannah was a threat to her or anyone else. And because of that, the third prong of that delusional compulsion insanity defense cannot and will not be met. So why did she do it? I've thought a lot about that, and I'm sure you have too. What was the prevailing emotion when she gave in and decided she was going to end it for both of them? Was it desperation? Was it anger at her situation? Was it a mercy killing? Was she saving Hannah? Did she just feel hopeless? Was she mentally ill? It's not the insanity defense. If this is what you think any of her motivation was in committing the act, none of those are insanity under the law. Because no matter how hopeless you feel, no matter how desperate you feel, no matter how angry you feel, no matter how frustrated you feel, you don't get to commit the act of murder. And that is the law. What does the
Bad Girl says, I believe she was abused and suffered mentally, but the fact she left to her parents for a couple of days proves she had an out. Yep, she did.
evidence actually show in this case?
Yep.
This was not a fleeting moment of insanity. It wasn't. The evidence shows that she thought about it, and she planned it. She had searched how to snap a neck. She had searched killing someone to save them. And you'll have her searches back there, and you can go through them, and you see the progression, because on about November 22nd and 23rd, she starts questioning the ideologies of the group. Am I sinning? Like, should I be with this man that has multiple wives? She's starting to question her reality. She's not questioning her delusions, she's questioning her reality. And then she starts to wonder about what the consequences of those certain things are. None of those are delusional. And then she starts to plan her exit strategy. And the evidence is she was weighing her options. She was Googling, and you can look at her phone and see, she was Googling travel plans. She was Googling bus tickets, how to get a bus ticket for a 13-month-old, woman traveling alone with baby. She was evaluating the other options. She was thinking about leaving. She was desperately tied to him and loved him. And as I said in my opening statement, she could not decide if she wanted to stay or go, so she picked a different option. And that is what the evidence shows. She was so desperate to not know which one she wanted that she just decided to end it for both of them, except for she was unsuccessful for herself. She was at her parents' house for days between when she Googled those thoughts of wanting to kill Hannah and when she actually killed Hannah. That's what.
Sarah, I've been there as well, and I'm glad that helped you.
The evidence is. So she wasn't deprived of the ability to get the help she wanted. She just wasn't ready to give him up.
Yep.
Her mom said she stayed for a couple of days and then she went to look at some property with him in Knoxville. And we know she wasn't ready to give him up because she stuck it out with him for years, even after she killed Hannah. If killing your own child doesn't wake you up, what does? She made those choices. She was not a captive. She had the ability to go. She had the ability to call 911. She had the ability to access money. That's what the evidence has been before you. She chose not to.
Trixie says, I myself cannot sympathize with her, not in any way. She knows it's wrong to red rum, and she had decided to end that baby's life. Her harming herself was just to cover up for her ending her baby's life. Yeah, I can agree with that. I agree with that. And I can see your perspective, definitely. You know, as far as insanity, I don't think she was insane at the time of the crime. Did the cult, personally, my feelings, did the cult maybe influence her to do something stupid? Maybe, possibly. But I don't see this as a case of insanity. And at the end of the day, there's a child that's no longer on this earth because of her decisions.
This is ultimately what the evidence in this case shows. She was not motivated by her delusions, her insanity, or her mental illness. What she was motivated by was her reality. And it was a reality that she chose over and over and over again. I'm asking you to
Mm.
hold her accountable for what she did to Hannah. Because while there may be some evidence that she's suffered a difficult life or that she's experienced certain things, that does not give her the right to take away the life of a 13-month-old child.
I mean, facts. CJ said, after I heard her, I feel the same way. She seemed stone cold. When her mom mentioned Hannah, she didn't care, just carried on speaking. Wow. That's crazy. I don't think visiting your parents when you have now. That means that she had a place that she could go to get away from everything. I agree with that she had a way to get away from everything and clear her mind and take a breath, and she chose to leave. Sarah agrees with Trixie and empathize with the abused, but empathy ends when they do what she did. Yep. Yep. Rubber Ramada room. If she was having mental issues, there was help available. I'm sorry. I agree.
That does not give her the right to stab that baby girl who did nothing to her repeatedly.
Excuse me.
There were so many other choices. So many other choices. And she chose that. There have to be consequences under the law for killing defenseless, innocent children. And when you apply the law, when you do the legal formula, when you look at the insanity laws, you will clearly see she does not meet them. And that the only true verdict in this case is one that holds her responsible for her actions, just as anybody else who committed an act like this would be, to find her guilty. This is the last place that Hannah experienced life.
I
She
agree.
stabbed this baby girl to death until what the ER doctor said, she was empty. She had no blood left.
Oh my God.
That was a violent, heinous, horrible way to die. And I don't care how bad your life is, you do not get to do that to this baby girl. And there be no consequences for you. She chose that life. Hannah did not.
Facts. Bad girl says seems like she unallowed Hannah to hurt him. Joy says she's selfish. Catherine says her parents told her if she came home, they would pay for schooling and buy her a car. CJ says she unallowed Hannah because of selfish reasons. That's where I'm at with all of this. I think we're all kind of agreeing. I could never work for the defense in a case of this type. Yeah, it would be hard. Chloe wanted it to just be them three, and he didn't want just her. I mean, exactly. Again, facts. That's what it boils down to. Me too, Joy. I need
Hold her
a record.
responsible. Apply the law. Apply the law in a reasoned way that doesn't play into sympathy, that is objective, that speaks to justice. That is your duty. And when you apply the law and you objectively evaluate the facts in this case, the only conclusion that you can reach is her guilt.
You're right, CJ.
Thank you. Members of the jury, then the next phase of the trial will be that I will instruct you on the law that you should apply to the evidence that you've heard in this case. However, we're going to let you take a recess before I do that. I had mentioned to you at the beginning of the trial that you are not allowed to have any kind of electronic device with you in the jury room during deliberation. So if you have phones, laptops, tablets, anything of that nature with you in the jury box or in the jury room, please remove them from the jury room. You may take them to a vehicle. You may give them to the bailiffs, who will have a box outside the deliberation room so that you can access them during breaks if you would like to. Leave us your notepads. Don't start talking about the case with each other. You have not heard the law that applies from the court yet, and we will.
All right. Oh, hold on.
see you back, we'll say at 20 till. Be back in the jury room at
Okay, so that's the end of the closing arguments. They went to recess and she gave them their rules for their deliberations. So they're going to deliberate. I will be watching for a verdict, and if I get a verdict and I'm not asleep or something like that, then I'll go live with it and we'll listen to it together like we usually do. Bad Girl says, I guess they played some of the phone calls in court. She was told to act nuts, Joy, so she could be playing a role, but I don't know. There's a little bunny. The little bunny that Zio gave me. Yeah. CJ said, yes, Joy. They did watch earlier today in particular. Eek, it was her parents, I do believe. Her dad, yeah. CJ said her dad. Steph sells stuff by the seashore. Said her body language and expressions are telling me she's been seen. She looks mad. I was all over the place with this, but now I'm saying guilty, period. I think so. I really do. We do need a verdict watch. I'll be keeping an eye on it. And I'll see what I can find out about pulling her records as well. I want to thank you all for being here today. I really appreciate you guys hanging out with me this lovely Tuesday afternoon. And I'll be back tomorrow at 1:30. I will be watching for a verdict. So if we get that in before I come back, I'll go live with that. Thank you all again for being here and being so kind and respectful in the chat box. And thank you. Thank you again. I really appreciate it. I really enjoy our time we get to spend together. I like hanging out with you guys and seeing what you have to say. If you're watching the replay, please let me know your thoughts and opinions on everything in the comment section below. And don't forget to hit the thumbs up. And I'll see y'all tomorrow at 1:30 Eastern. Have the best day ever. Bye.
There is something you should know. I have never really liked you at all. I cannot hide it anymore. I've been thinking about the future, trying to forget about the past. So many ways that I could change for the better. Don't even know where to begin. If I allow myself to dream, will it be as good as it seems? Pull me out of this place in the middle. Nothing more to embrace in the middle. If I try to climb up the wall, everyone can see when I fall.
No, if there is a verdict, I will come live, but you'll know because it'll say there's a verdict. And so I'll come live and then you just look for my live stream and we'll watch it together if they do have a verdict and I catch it. I might not catch it.